The first person who ever made Leo Romano smile again was not a doctor, not a therapist, not one of the expensive child specialists flown into Chicago on private jets, and not one of the polished women who drifted through Dominic Romano's mansion smelling like roses and money. It was Beatrice Gallagher, a soft, nervous, fat woman in a rain-damp cardigan, standing in the doorway with a bag of children's books under one arm and flour on her sleeve from the bakery where she had worked that morning. No one in the Romano house expected her to last 1 hour. The guards looked at her like she had taken a wrong turn. The housekeeper stared at her round cheeks, her thick waist, her wide hips, and her sensible shoes with open confusion. Even the old marble floors seemed too cold and too grand for someone like her. But the boy at the top of the staircase looked down at her through the wooden railing. Silent and haunted, and for the first time in months, he did not run away. Beatrice knew fear. She had known it since childhood, though it had never worn a black suit or carried a gun before. Usually fear sounded like laughter behind her back. It sounded like girls in school whispering that she took up too much space. It sounded like men saying she had a pretty face, as if the rest of her body was a mistake that needed forgiveness. It sounded like her own aunt telling her to choose dark clothes, because dark clothes made people look smaller. By the time Beatrice turned 30, she had learned how to lower her eyes, hold her breath in elevators, and make jokes about herself before anyone else could. Kind-hearted people called her sweet. Cruel people called her clumsy. Almost everyone called her harmless. And maybe that was why she took the job when the agency called, a live-in caregiver position. 1 child. Confidential household. No questions asked. The agency woman had not said the name Romano until Beatrice signed the first stack of papers. Then she lowered her voice like the walls might be listening. "Dominic Romano," she whispered, as if saying his name too loudly might invite him into the room. Beatrice had heard of him. Everyone in Chicago had heard of him, even people who pretended they had not. His name floated through restaurants, charity galas, police briefings, union offices, courtrooms, and late-night news reports, without ever landing anywhere long enough to be caught. He owned construction companies, hotels, warehouses, trucking routes, and half the men who smiled on television while promising to clean up the city. Some people called him a businessman. Some called him a criminal. Most just called him dangerous. Beatrice almost walked out. Then the agency woman told her about Leo. He was 7 years old. He had stopped speaking after witnessing an attack on his father's convoy 6 months earlier. He had been in the back seat when the bullets hit the car. His nanny had died protecting him. Since then, Leo had barely eaten, barely slept, and screamed whenever anyone touched the curtains in his room, because the sound reminded him of glass breaking. Every specialist had failed. Every expensive solution had fallen flat. Dominic Romano did not want another expert. He wanted someone patient, someone soft, someone who would not treat his son like a broken machine. That was how Beatrice found herself standing in the front hall of the Romano estate on a stormy Thursday evening, trying not to shake as rain tapped against the tall windows. The mansion sat behind iron gates in a private pocket of the North Shore, far enough from the city to feel hidden, but close enough for the skyline to glow like a warning in the distance. The house was beautiful in the way old power was beautiful. Dark wood, creamstone, high ceilings, oil paintings of unsmiling men, fresh flowers in heavy vases, guards posted at corners with quiet eyes and hands folded in front of them. Nothing about it felt like a home. It felt like a castle built by someone who expected enemies. A tall man with silver hair introduced himself as Marco and took her coat. He was polite, but his eyes measured her with the trained caution of a man who trusted no one. Beatrice smoothed the front of her simple navy dress and became painfully aware of every inch of herself. The dress was clean and soft, but old. It pulled slightly at her chest and clung to her stomach when she moved. Her tights were practical. Her shoes were flat. She had tried to look professional, but inside that mansion, surrounded by shining floors and silent staff, she felt like a woman drawn in crayon among oil paintings. Then Dominic Romano entered. The air changed before Beatrice even saw him. The guards straightened. Marco stopped speaking. Somewhere deeper in the house, a door closed softly, and the sound carried through the hall like a final decision. Dominic came down the corridor in a dark suit with no tie, his black hair pushed back from a hard, tired face. He was not loud. He did not need to be. Power moved with him so naturally that the room seemed to make space before he reached it. He was broad-shouldered, calm, and frighteningly controlled, with eyes so dark they made Beatrice forget what she had planned to say. There was a scar near his jaw, thin and pale, almost hidden unless the light caught it. He looked like a man who had survived many things and forgiven none of them. "You're Miss Gallagher," he said. His voice was lower than she expected, quiet, smooth and heavy enough to make her fingers tighten around the strap of her bag. "Yes," Beatrice answered, then cleared her throat because her voice came out too small. "Yes, I'm Beatrice Gallagher. The agency sent me." Dominic's eyes moved over her, not in the careless way men usually looked at her, and not in the cruel way women like Cassandra would later look at her. His gaze was direct, serious, and unreadable. Beatrice braced herself for the familiar shift, the moment when surprise became disappointment. She had seen it too many times. People expected caregivers to be neat, thin, graceful, easy to place beside a rich child in a rich home. Beatrice was none of those things. She was warm and wide and nervous, with rain curling the hair around her temples, and a body that had never been allowed to enter expensive rooms without apologizing. But Dominic did not apologize for looking, and he did not look away. "My son does not like strangers," he said. "He may not speak to you." "That's okay," Beatrice said softly. "Children don't have to speak before they're ready." Something moved in Dominic's face. Not softness, not yet. More like attention, as if one simple sentence had reached a place no expensive specialist had touched. "He may throw things, can duck." For one breath, the cold hall became less cold. Marco looked down as if hiding a smile. Dominic's eyes narrowed, but not with anger. Beatrice realized, with a strange little flutter in her chest, that he might have almost smiled too. Before he could answer, a small sound came from above them. A creak. Beatrice looked up. A little boy stood at the top of the stairs in blue pajamas, one hand wrapped around the railing. He was thin in that fragile way children become when grief seizes their hunger. His dark hair fell over his forehead. His eyes were too old. He held a toy fire truck against his chest like armor. Dominic turned instantly. The entire force of the man shifted toward the boy, and Beatrice saw the truth beneath the expensive suit and feared name. He was not just a boss. He was a father drowning quietly in a house full of people who could protect his son's body but not reach his heart. "Leo," Dominic said gently. The boy did not answer. His eyes stayed on Beatrice. Beatrice did not move toward him. She did not wave. She did not use the bright, false voice adults often used when they were trying too hard. Instead, she slowly lowered herself onto the bottom step with a careful breath, because her knees ached when she bent too quickly and because she knew children noticed when adults pretended not to struggle. "Hi, Leo," she said. "I brought too many books because I couldn't decide which one was best. That happens to me a lot. I also brought a story about a dragon who is scared of thunderstorms, which makes sense because thunder is very loud and honestly kind of rude." Leo's fingers tightened around the toy truck. "I don't know if you like dragons," Beatrice continued, opening her bag slowly, "but I thought I'd bring him just in case. He's green, grumpy, and terrible at sharing cookies." The boy did not smile. Not yet. But he took one step down. Dominic did not breathe. Beatrice looked into her bag and pulled out the book, keeping her movements slow. "I can leave it right here. You don't have to read it with me. You don't even have to like it. Sometimes I don't like things just because people tell me I should." Another step. The guards were silent. The storm pressed rain against the glass. Somewhere in the walls, the old house creaked. Beatrice placed the book beside her on the step and folded her hands in her lap. Leo came down 3 more steps, then stopped. His eyes flicked to his father, then back to Beatrice. His mouth parted slightly, as if he had forgotten how words worked but remembered they existed. Beatrice smiled, small and gentle. "You can take your time." The boy came down the rest of the stairs. He did not touch her, he did not speak. He simply reached for the book, grabbed it with one hand, and ran back upstairs so fast his pajama feet slapped against the wood. No one moved. Then Dominic Romano looked at Beatrice as if she had performed something impossible. She wanted to say it was nothing. She almost did. That was her instinct, to make herself smaller, to hand away credit before anyone could mock her for wanting it. But something in Dominic's eyes stopped her. He did not look amused. He did not look doubtful. He looked shaken. "You'll stay," he said. It was not a question, but Beatrice heard the plea buried beneath the command. "I'll stay," she said. By the end of her first week, Beatrice understood that the Romano mansion was full of ghosts, and not all of them were dead. Leo haunted the upper floor in silence, slipping from room to room with his toy truck under one arm, avoiding windows after sunset. Dominic haunted his own office, speaking in low tones behind closed doors, his men coming and going at all hours with grim faces and sealed envelopes. The staff haunted the halls carefully, trained to make no sudden noise, never raise their voices, never ask about the nights when cars arrived with cracked windshields and left with different plates. And Beatrice, in her soft cardigans and loose dresses, moved among them with warm tea, bedtime stories, and the stubborn belief that broken things could still be held gently. Leo did not become easy. Some mornings he refused to eat. Some afternoons he hid under his bed when a motorcycle backfired beyond the gates. Once, when a glass slipped from a maid's hand and shattered on the kitchen tile, he screamed until his little body shook so hard Beatrice thought he might break. No one knew what to do. The staff froze. Marco called for Dominic, but Beatrice got down on the floor, ignoring the glass near her knees, and began humming a soft, silly tune from a cartoon she remembered watching as a child. She did not touch Leo. She did not tell him to calm down. She simply stayed near him, steady and warm, until his screams faded into sobs. When Dominic arrived, he found his son curled against Beatrice's side, fist locked around the sleeve of her cardigan, cheek pressed against her soft arm. Beatrice was still humming. Her eyes were wet, but her voice did not shake. Dominic stood in the doorway for a long time. After that, he started appearing in places she did not expect. At breakfast, leaning against the doorway while Beatrice tried to convince Leo that pancakes shaped like bears tasted better than normal pancakes. In the library, watching as she read the dragon book in different voices until Leo's mouth twitched. Near the garden doors, silent and still, while she showed Leo how to plant basil in a clay pot because living things could be small and scared and still grow. Beatrice tried not to notice Dominic watching her. It was easier to believe he was watching his son. That made sense. That was safe. But sometimes she felt his gaze resting on her when Leo had already left the room. Sometimes she would turn and find him looking at the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, or the way she held her mug with both hands, or the way she laughed softly when Leo did something brave and tiny, like choosing his own socks. Dominic never said anything improper. He never stepped too close. But his attention had weight, and Beatrice felt it long after she left the room. The first real change came on a cold Sunday morning. Snow dusted the lawns, and the lake beyond the trees looked gray and secretive. Beatrice had made cinnamon toast, because Leo had whispered the word cinnamon the night before, so quietly she had almost thought she imagined it. It was the first word he had spoken in her presence. She did not tell Dominic right away. She wanted Leo to own it for himself. They sat at the kitchen island, Leo swinging his feet from the stool, Beatrice cutting the toast into small triangles. Dominic entered wearing a black sweater instead of a suit, his hair still damp from a shower. The sight of him that way, less armored and more human, made Beatrice accidentally drop the butter knife. It clattered against the plate. Leo flinched, but he did not run. Beatrice froze, watching him carefully. Dominic did too. Leo looked at the knife, then at Beatrice. Very softly, with crumbs on his mouth, he said, loud. The whole world seemed to stop. Beatrice smiled like the sun had come through the walls. Yes, she whispered. That was loud. Sorry about that. Dominic's hand gripped the edge of the counter. His face went still, but his eyes changed completely. He looked at Leo with such raw pain and hope that Beatrice had to look away to give him privacy. Leo picked up another piece of toast and ate it like nothing had happened. But something had happened, something enormous. Dominic crossed the kitchen slowly and stood behind his son. He did not touch him, not yet. He only bent slightly and said, "Good morning, Leo." Leo stared at his plate. Then, after a long silence, he whispered, "Morning." Beatrice covered her mouth with her hand. Dominic closed his eyes. For a moment, the most feared man in Chicago looked like a man barely holding himself together. That evening, flowers appeared in Beatrice's room. Not roses, not the dramatic kind that seemed chosen to impress, but soft yellow tulips in a simple glass vase. There was no card, she knew anyway. She touched one petal with the tip of her finger and felt something dangerous open inside her chest. Hope, maybe, or fear wearing a softer dress. The next day, Cassandra arrived. Beatrice heard her before she saw her, heels striking marble, a bright laugh that sounded expensive and sharp, the kind of voice that expected every room to rearrange itself around her. Beatrice was in the sitting room with Leo, building a crooked tower from wooden blocks, when the doors opened and a woman swept inside in a cream coat trimmed with fur. She was tall, thin, and glittering, with pale hair falling in perfect waves and lips painted the color of expensive wine. She looked at Leo first with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Then she looked at Beatrice. The smile became something else. "Oh," Cassandra said. "So this is the new nanny." Beatrice began to stand, but Leo's hand caught her sleeve. She stayed seated. "I'm Beatrice," she said politely. "I can see that." Cassandra's eyes traveled over her body with slow, open cruelty. Dominic really has become sentimental. I suppose every tragic house needs a comforting little dumpling in the corner. Heat rushed into Beatrice's face. The old instinct came back so fast it stole her breath. Look down. Smile weakly. Pretend it does not hurt. Let the beautiful woman win, because women like her always win in rooms like this. But Leo moved closer to Beatrice. Cassandra noticed. Her expression tightened. "Leo, darling," she said, holding out one manicured hand. "Come say hello. I brought you something from Paris." Leo stared at her hand as if it were a snake. Beatrice kept her voice gentle. "He doesn't have to if he doesn't want to." Cassandra laughed softly. How sweet. The help has opinions. Beatrice felt the words land exactly where Cassandra intended. Not just nanny. Not caregiver. The help. A woman paid to be present, not valued. A woman who could be dismissed with a signature. Before Beatrice could answer, the air changed again. Dominic stood in the doorway. No one had heard him enter. His dark eyes moved from Leo's hand gripping Beatrice's sleeve to Beatrice's flushed face, then finally to Cassandra. The room seemed to lose warmth. "Why are you here?" he asked. Cassandra turned with a practiced smile. "I came to see Leo and you. I heard you hired someone new. I was curious." "You were not invited." Her smile faltered, but only for a second. "Dominic, don't be cold. I'm only trying to help. Look at the situation. The boy needs stability. He needs someone appropriate around him, someone who understands your world. Not—" her gaze flicked to Beatrice again, soft and poisonous. "Not whatever this is." Beatrice wished the floor would open. Her body felt too large, too visible, too easy to insult. She started to pull her sleeve gently from Leo's hand so she could leave, but Leo held tighter. Dominic saw that too. He stepped into the room, each movement calm and terrible. "This woman got my son to speak." Cassandra's face went pale beneath her makeup. Dominic's voice remained quiet. "This woman got him to eat, to sleep, to sit in a room without watching every door. You walked in here and in less than 1 minute you made him afraid again." "I didn't mean." "Yes," Dominic said. "You did." Cassandra's eyes sharpened with humiliation. "Are you serious? You're defending her? Dominic, look at her." The silence that followed was so deep Beatrice could hear the fire crackling in the hearth. Dominic's face changed. Not loudly, not dramatically. Something colder than anger settled over him. "I am looking at her," he said, "and I see the only person in this house who has brought my child peace." Cassandra's mouth opened, then closed. Dominic turned slightly toward Marco, who had appeared in the hall. "Take Miss Vale to the gate. If she enters this property again without my permission, she does not leave comfortably." Cassandra stared at him as if he had slapped her. Then her humiliation twisted into rage. For 1 second, her beautiful mask broke, and Beatrice saw the hatred underneath. Not something darker, something wounded and dangerous. "This is embarrassing, Dominic," Cassandra whispered. "For you." Dominic did not blink. "No, you are." Marco escorted her out while she fought to keep her dignity with every sharp step. The front doors closed in the distance. The mansion breathed again. Beatrice looked down at her hands. They were trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Dominic turned to her, and for the first time anger touched his voice. "Not at her. Do not apologize because someone was cruel to you." Beatrice tried to smile, but it broke before it formed. "I'm used to it." "I know," Dominic said, and the softness in those two words nearly undid her. "That is what makes me angry." Leo leaned against her arm again, quiet but no longer shaking. Beatrice looked at him and forced herself to breathe slowly, in, out, in, out. She had come to this house to care for a broken child. She had not expected to feel protected. She had not expected the most dangerous man in Chicago to look at her pain like it mattered. That night, after Leo fell asleep with the dragon book open on his blanket, Beatrice stepped into the hallway and found Dominic waiting near the window. Snow moved through the darkness beyond the glass. The house was quiet, but not peaceful, not fully. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For staying." Beatrice looked down. "You pay me to stay." "I pay many people," Dominic said. "Most of them are not brave." She laughed softly, uncomfortable with the word. "I'm not brave. I was terrified of Cassandra." "I know," he said. "You stayed kind anyway." The words settled over her like warmth. Beatrice did not know what to do with them. Compliments usually came with conditions, jokes, or pity. Dominic gave his like facts. He stepped closer, slow enough that she could move away if she wanted to. She did not. The space between them became small and charged. She could smell cedar, snow, and the faint smoke of his office fireplace. His gaze dropped briefly to her mouth, then returned to her eyes. "People have spent a long time teaching you to make yourself smaller," he said. They were wrong. Beatrice's breath caught. Before she could answer, Marco appeared at the end of the hall. His face was tense. The softness vanished from Dominic instantly. "What is it?" Dominic asked. Marco's eyes flicked to Beatrice, then back to his boss. "Cassandra made a call after she left the gate. To Arthur Pendleton." The name seemed to darken the hallway. Beatrice did not know who Arthur Pendleton was, but she saw what it did to Dominic. His body went still. His eyes became cold enough to frighten the shadows. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Yes." For a moment no one spoke. Snow brushed against the windows like whispering fingers. Far away, somewhere beyond the gates, a dog barked once and went silent. Dominic turned his head slightly, looking toward Leo's bedroom door. Then his gaze came back to Beatrice. The fear in the mansion changed shape. It was no longer old grief hiding in the walls. It was something outside, moving closer. And Beatrice Gallagher, who had spent her whole life being treated like the easiest person in the room to hurt, had no idea that a woman's jealousy and a rival's hunger were about to make her the center of a war. Snow kept falling against the dark windows of the Romano mansion, soft and silent, as if the world outside had been covered in a white sheet to hide what was coming. Beatrice stood in the hallway outside Leo's room with her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. She did not know Arthur Pendleton's face. She did not know his voice. She only knew what his name did to Dominic Romano. It made the most feared man in Chicago go completely still, and somehow that was more frightening than if he had shouted. Dominic looked toward the staircase, then toward the long corridor where his son slept, and the house seemed to tighten around them. Marco waited for an order. The guards along the hall lowered their voices. Every soft sound suddenly felt dangerous. Dominic stepped closer to Beatrice, and the shadow of his body blocked the cold light coming from the window. "Arthur Pendleton has wanted this house for years," he said quietly. "He does not fight like a man. He waits, he studies. He looks for the one place a person still bleeds." Beatrice swallowed. "And Cassandra called him because she thinks that place is me." Dominic's eyes darkened. "No. She called him because she is angry enough to forget what happens when people touch what I love." The word love passed between them like a match struck in a dark room. It was too soon, too dangerous, too impossible, and yet Beatrice felt it burn through every old bruise the world had left inside her. Dominic seemed to realize what he had said, but he did not take it back. He only looked at her with that steady, terrifying honesty that made her feel both protected and exposed. "I should leave," Beatrice whispered. "If I'm the reason they come here, then I should go somewhere else, somewhere away from Leo." Dominic's face changed at once. "No, Dominic, listen to me. I am listening." "No, you're protecting. There's a difference." Her voice trembled, but she made herself continue. "I know I don't belong in your world. I know I'm not trained for this. I'm not brave the way your men are brave. I'm not fast, I'm not dangerous, and I'm not someone people are afraid of. If Arthur thinks hurting me will hurt you, then maybe the safest thing is for me to disappear before he gets the chance." Dominic reached out but stopped before touching her, as if even in his fear he wanted her to choose. "You think disappearing will make you safe because people taught you that being unseen was protection. It was not. It was loneliness. I will not let you return to that." Beatrice blinked hard against the sting in her eyes. "I'm scared, I know. I'm scared for Leo." His expression softened in a way that hurt to see. "So am I." That simple confession did more than any promise could have done. Dominic Romano. The man people whispered about, the man whose enemies vanished from courtrooms and boardrooms, was afraid. Not for his empire, not for his money, for one silent little boy asleep behind a bedroom door, and for the woman who had taught that boy to say good morning again. By dawn, the mansion had become a fortress wearing the mask of a home. Guards moved through the halls with quiet purpose. Extra men were placed at the gates. Security screens glowed in the lower office. Cars were moved. Staff were sent away with sealed envelopes and instructions not to return until called. Dominic wanted Beatrice and Leo taken to a safe house before sunset, but the storm had turned the roads slick and cruel. The private road leading away from the estate was narrow, curved, and surrounded by trees heavy with ice. Marco warned that moving them in daylight might be exactly what Arthur expected. Dominic hated the delay. Beatrice saw it in the hard line of his jaw, in the way his hand rested near his phone, in the way his eyes kept finding Leo whenever the boy entered the room. Leo knew something was wrong. Children always did. He sat close to Beatrice in the library, his dragon book open but unread, his small shoulder pressed against her arm. The fire snapped softly in the hearth, and every crack made him flinch. Beatrice wanted to gather him against her, but she waited. She had learned that Leo's trust worked like a candle in a draught. Too much movement, even loving movement, could put it out. "Are bad men coming?" he whispered. Beatrice's throat tightened. Across the room, Dominic looked up from where he stood near the window. Beatrice took a slow breath. Maybe. Leo's eyes filled with fear. "But there are good people here too," she said gently. "Your dad, Marco. The guards, me." Leo looked at her with painful seriousness. "You're not a guard." "No," Beatrice said, giving him a soft smile. "I'm more like a bear." His eyebrows pulled together. "A nervous bear," she added. "The kind that makes toast and reads books and gets scared of loud noises. But still a bear." For the first time that day, Leo almost smiled. Dominic watched them, and something in his face broke open just slightly, like light through a locked door. Beatrice looked away first because the feeling between them had become too large to hold in front of a child. That afternoon, Cassandra sent flowers. They arrived in a white box tied with black ribbon, carried by a delivery man who looked pale and harmless, with snow melting on his shoulders. The guard at the outer gate checked the package. The guard at the inner door checked it again. Inside were white lilies, perfect and cold, with a small card tucked between them. Marco brought the card to Dominic. Beatrice stood beside Leo near the library table, her hand resting on the back of his chair. Dominic opened the envelope. His face did not move, but the room grew colder. "What does it say?" Beatrice asked. Dominic's gaze lifted to hers. "It says, 'Every home has a door.'" Then the lights went out. The mansion fell into blackness so complete that Beatrice heard Leo's breath catch before he screamed. The sound tore through the library, high and raw, filled with memories of breaking glass and gunfire. Dominic crossed the room in an instant, but before he reached them, the emergency lights flashed red along the walls. Somewhere downstairs, a crash echoed through the house. Then another. Then the deep, terrible sound of the front alarms dying all at once. Arthur Pendleton had not come through the gates. He had come through the house later. Beatrice would learn there had been an old service tunnel beneath the East Garden, sealed decades ago and forgotten by everyone except the families who built the first illegal routes through the city. Cassandra had not only called Arthur. She had given him memories. She had given him details from the years she had spent inside Dominic's home, little things no guard would think mattered. A wine cellar door that stuck in winter, a blind spot near the east pantry, a servant passage behind the old portrait hall. Every home had a door, and Cassandra had pointed to it with a smile. Dominic lifted Leo into his arms, but the boy fought him in panic, kicking, sobbing, reaching blindly for Beatrice. "Bae," he cried. It was the first time he had called her anything at all. Beatrice moved without thinking. She stepped close, placed both hands on Leo's trembling back, and began humming the silly cartoon tune from the kitchen floor. Her own body shook. Her legs felt weak. Her chest tightened so badly she could barely breathe. But she hummed anyway, soft and steady, pressing her fear down under the sound until Leo's screams broke into gasps. Dominic looked at her over his son's head. The red emergency light cut across his face, turning him into something almost unreal. "Take him to the nursery passage," he said. "Marco will go with you." "No," Marco said from the doorway, gun drawn. "Boss, I need to stay with you. You need to keep my son alive." A distant burst of gunfire cracked through the lower floor. Leo buried his face against Beatrice's shoulder with a sob. Dominic handed him to her carefully, and Beatrice felt the boy cling to her with desperate strength. She was not fast. She was not trained. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought she might faint. But Leo's arms were around her neck, and that made the world very simple. Dominic touched Beatrice's face once, just once, his thumb brushing her cheek with a tenderness that did not belong in a house under attack. "Do exactly what Marco says." Beatrice nodded. Then Dominic turned and walked toward the gunfire. Marco led Beatrice through the back of the library, pushing open a narrow panel hidden between shelves. The passage beyond was dark, smelling of dust, old wood, and cold stone. Beatrice had to turn sideways to fit through parts of it. Leo heavy in her arms, his face pressed into her neck. Her hips brushed the walls. Her shoulder scraped against a nail. Her breath came in painful pulls. Behind them, the mansion thundered with footsteps and shouts. Somewhere, glass shattered. Somewhere, a man screamed. "I can walk," Leo whispered shakily. "You sure?" Beatrice asked. He nodded against her. She set him down but kept his hand locked in hers. Marco moved ahead with his weapon raised, his silver hair red under the emergency lights that slipped through cracks in the passage. "This way," he whispered. "There's a safe room behind the nursery." They were almost there when the wall ahead exploded inward. Marco shoved Beatrice and Leo back just before two armed men burst through the broken panel from the nursery side. The passage filled with dust and noise. Marco fired once, twice, and one man fell. The other slammed into him, driving him against the wall. The gun skidded across the floor, disappearing into the dark. Leo screamed. Beatrice grabbed him and stumbled backward. But a third figure stepped from behind the broken nursery door. Cassandra. She wore black now, not cream. Her pale hair was pulled back, her beautiful face sharp with fury and triumph. In her hand was a small pistol held too tightly by someone who wanted to look calm and was not. "Well," Cassandra said, breathing hard. "Look at you, still playing mother." Beatrice pushed Leo behind her. "Don't come closer," Cassandra laughed. "Or what?" "You'll read me a bedtime story. The insult should have hurt. Maybe another day it would have." But something had changed inside Beatrice between the dark library and the narrow passage. Maybe courage was not the absence of fear. Maybe it was fear with someone smaller standing behind you. Cassandra's eyes flicked to Leo. "Come here, sweetheart. We're going to take you somewhere safe." Leo gripped the back of Beatrice's cardigan. "No." Cassandra's face twisted. "You little ungrateful brat, I tried to be kind to you." Beatrice felt anger rise in her, slow and hot. Not for herself. For Leo. For every adult who thought a child's fear was an inconvenience. For every polished woman who mistook cruelty for strength. For every person who had entered this house wanting power and never once asking what the boy had lost. "You were never kind," Beatrice said. Cassandra's pistol shifted toward her. "Move." "No." The word came out stronger than Beatrice expected. Cassandra blinked, almost offended by it. "You really think he loves you?" Cassandra hissed. "Dominic is using you because his son likes your soft little nanny act. When this is over, he'll remember what you are. A fat charity case in a cheap dress." Beatrice flinched, but she did not move. Cassandra smiled. "There she is. That's the real you. Scared, embarrassed, waiting for someone beautiful to tell you where to stand." Something small moved behind Cassandra. Not a guard, not Dominic. Leo's toy fire truck sat on the nursery shelf beside a ceramic lamp where Beatrice had left it that morning after helping him clean. Beatrice's eyes flicked to it for half a second, then back to Cassandra. Cassandra noticed too late. Leo moved first. He grabbed the toy truck from the shelf and threw it with all the strength his little body had. It hit Cassandra's wrist. The gun jerked sideways. Beatrice lunged. She did not move gracefully. She moved with everything she had, with her full body, her full weight, her full fear. She crashed into Cassandra, driving her back against the nursery table. The pistol fired into the ceiling, deafening in the small space. Beatrice cried out, but she did not let go. Cassandra clawed at her face, screaming, calling her names, twisting beneath her. Beatrice held on, using the body she had been taught to hate as a shield between Cassandra and Leo. Marco broke free from the man attacking him and slammed him into the wall. Then he turned, kicked the pistol away, and pulled Cassandra off Beatrice with one hard movement. Cassandra hit the floor sobbing with rage, her perfect hair loose around her face. Beatrice stumbled back, gasping. Her cheek burned where Cassandra had scratched her. Her knees hurt. Her shoulder throbbed. Leo ran into her arms and she dropped to the floor to catch him, wrapping herself around him while he shook. "You did good," she whispered into his hair. "You were so brave, my brave little dragon." Leo sobbed into her chest. "You didn't leave." "No," Beatrice said, holding him tighter. "I didn't leave." Then a new voice came from the broken passage, touching. Arthur Pendleton stepped through the dust like a man entering a dinner party. He was older than Dominic, lean and elegant, with silver at his temples and pale eyes that looked almost kind until they focused on you. Two men followed behind him. Marco raised his weapon, but Arthur's man pressed a gun to his ribs. "Easy," Arthur said. "Everyone has done enough shouting." Cassandra looked up from the floor. "Arthur, get me out of here." Arthur glanced at her with mild disgust in a moment. Beatrice slowly stood, keeping Leo behind her again. Her whole body ached. She wanted Dominic. She wanted this nightmare to end. But Arthur looked at her with the calm interest of a man studying a weak lock. "So this is the woman," he said. "The warm heart of the Romano house." Beatrice said nothing. Arthur smiled. Cassandra said Dominic had grown sentimental. I did not believe her. Dominic Romano, brought to his knees by a nanny, a rather ordinary one too. Beatrice's voice came out quiet. "You don't know anything about this house. I know enough. I know Dominic will trade half his city for the boy. And now perhaps even more for you." The words chilled her, because Arthur was right about one thing. Dominic would come. He would come angry. He would come fast. And if Arthur was waiting, Dominic might die at the door of his own child's room. Beatrice looked at the nursery around them. The overturned chair, the broken panel, the lamp on the table, the old curtains, the emergency lights, the small wall keypad beside the closet door, half hidden behind hanging coats. Dominic had shown her the safe room code the night before, just in case. Marco had told her never to press the lower black button unless there was no other choice because it sealed the room and triggered the fire suppression system in the nursery wing. No other choice had arrived. Arthur reached for Leo. "Come now, boy." Leo whimpered. Beatrice stepped backward, as if afraid. "Please don't hurt him." Arthur's smile deepened. "That depends on your father. He's just a child," Beatrice whispered, moving another step back. Her hand brushed the closet frame. Arthur moved closer. Beatrice pressed the black button. The nursery doors slammed shut with a violent metal crack. Heavy locks dropped inside the walls. White vapor burst from the ceiling in a roaring cloud. The fire system filled the room with freezing mist, blinding everyone at once. Arthur shouted. Cassandra screamed. One of the men fired wildly, the shot cracking into the wall. Beatrice grabbed Leo, dropped low the way Marco had told her during one of his quiet safety lessons, and crawled toward the small safe room door behind the closet. Marco tackled the nearest man in the fog. Furniture crashed, feet slipped. The world became white, cold, and full of terror. Beatrice found the handle by touch. She shoved Leo inside first, then turned back. Marco was on one knee, bleeding from his shoulder but still fighting. Arthur appeared through the mist, reaching for Beatrice with a face no longer calm. "You stupid woman," he snarled. For once Beatrice did not hear the word stupid in the voices of everyone who had ever mocked her. She heard only panic. His panic. She grabbed the ceramic lamp from the table and swung it with both hands. It shattered against Arthur's face. He went down hard. Marco reached her. Inside, Beatrice stumbled into the safe room, dragging him with her. The door sealed behind them. For several seconds there was only darkness. Leo's sobbing, Marco's rough breathing, and Beatrice's heart hammering like thunder. Then through the reinforced wall came Dominic's voice, not shouting, not panicked. Cold. "Where is my son?" Arthur's answer was muffled by the door, but the fear in it was clear. The next few minutes passed like a storm heard from underground. There were footsteps, hard commands, a burst of fighting, Cassandra's sharp scream, then silence so sudden it felt unreal. Beatrice held Leo with one arm and pressed her other hand over his ear. She hummed until her throat hurt. She hummed until the safe room keypad turned green. The door opened. Dominic stood there covered in mist and shadow, his hair damp, his suit torn at the shoulder, his eyes wild until they found Leo, then Beatrice, then Marco. His face changed in a way she would remember for the rest of her life. Leo broke away from her and ran to him. Dominic dropped to his knees and caught his son with both arms. He held him so tightly, his head bowed over Leo's small shoulder, and for one quiet second, the feared Mafia boss of Chicago shook like any father who had almost lost his child. "You came," Leo cried. "Always," Dominic whispered. "Always." Then his eyes lifted to Beatrice. She was standing in the safe room doorway with a bleeding scratch on her cheek, dust in her hair, her cardigan torn, her body aching in a dozen places. She expected him to look horrified. Instead, Dominic looked at her as if she had become the center of the room, the center of the house, the center of everything that still mattered. Arthur Pendleton did not leave the Romano estate as a king. His men were gone. His face was bloody. His hands were bound behind his back as Dominic's guards dragged him past the nursery door. Cassandra followed, pale and shaking, her beauty cracked open by fear. She looked at Beatrice once, and for the first time there was no mockery in her eyes, only disbelief. The woman she had called weak had ruined everything. Dominic stepped toward Arthur, still holding Leo with one arm. "You came into my home through an old door," he said softly. "You leave through the front so everyone sees what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness." Arthur tried to speak, but Dominic turned away before he could finish. That was the final insult. Not rage, not a grand threat. Dismissal by morning. The snow had stopped, the estate was damaged, but standing. The broken glass had been swept. The nursery wing smelled faintly of smoke, dust, and cold water. Marco survived, grumbling from a guest room where a private doctor stitched his shoulder and ordered him not to move. Leo stayed close to Beatrice and Dominic, speaking more in one morning than he had in months. Small words, broken words, precious words, toast, dragon, stay dad. And Beatrice stayed not because she was trapped, not because Dominic commanded it. She stayed because when the sun rose over the white lawn, Dominic found her in the library and did something no one in his house expected. He got down on one knee in front of her, not to propose, not yet, not for show. He knelt because she was sitting in the armchair with a blanket around her shoulders, exhausted and bruised, and he wanted to meet her eyes without making her look up at him. "You saved my son," he said. Beatrice's lips trembled. "Leo saved me too." Dominic reached for her hand, slow and careful. "You saved this house. I was terrified. I know, I almost fell twice in that passage. I hit Arthur with a lamp because I didn't know what else to do, I cried after. I'm probably going to cry again. Dominic's mouth softened. Then cry, I will hold you. The kindness of that undid her. Tears spilled down her cheeks and she tried to wipe them away quickly, embarrassed by the size of her feelings, by the softness of her body under the blanket, by the way she still expected love to be taken back. Once someone saw too much of her. Dominic did not let her hide. He lifted her hand to his mouth and kissed her knuckles, one by one, as if each trembling finger deserved reverence. I love you, Beatrice Gallagher, he said. Not because you fixed my son, not because you saved my home, not because you were useful to me. I love you because you are warm in a world that tried to make you cold. I love you because you are soft and still stronger than people made of steel. I love your courage, your kindness, your stubborn heart, your laugh, your body, every inch of the woman sitting in front of me. I do not love you despite anything. I love you exactly as you are. Beatrice covered her mouth, but the sob escaped anyway. Dominic leaned closer, his dark eyes shining with something deeper than possession now, something steadier. You are not a joke. You are not a weakness. You are not the woman people settle for when they cannot have better. You are the heart of this house. You are the reason my son came back to me, and if you will have me, Beatrice, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never again question whether you are wanted. For a long moment, she could not speak. The girl who had grown up taking up too much space in rooms that did not want her, sat in the quiet library of the most dangerous man in Chicago and realized she did not too large anymore. She felt held. She felt seen. She felt real. Leo appeared in the doorway with his dragon book under one arm. His hair was messy, his pajamas wrinkled, his eyes still tired but alive. "Beh," he said softly. "Can we have cinnamon toast?" Beatrice laughed through her tears. Dominic looked over his shoulder and the smile that touched his face was small, broken and beautiful. "Yes," Beatrice said, standing slowly as Dominic helped her up. "We can have cinnamon toast." Leo walked to her and took her hand. Then, after a shy pause, he took Dominic's too. Together they went to the kitchen as morning light filled the mansion. The halls were still guarded. The city outside was still dangerous. Dominic Romano was still feared by men who knew better than to whisper his name too loudly. But inside that house, something had changed forever. The rooms no longer felt like a fortress built around grief. They felt like a home learning how to breathe. And Beatrice Gallagher, the fat woman the world had mocked, dismissed, and underestimated, did not become powerful by turning hard. She became powerful by remaining kind when cruelty would have been easier. She became the woman a broken child trusted in the dark, the woman a feared Mafia boss loved without shame, and the woman who proved that softness could stand in front of danger and refuse to move. By the end of winter, the Romano mansion was known across Chicago for many things. Its guarded gates, its silent cars, its powerful owner. But those who were allowed inside knew the truth. The real center of the house was not Dominic's office, or the locked rooms below the east wing, or the men with guns at the door. It was the kitchen in the morning, where Leo laughed with cinnamon on his mouth, where Dominic stood behind Beatrice with his arms around her waist, and where Beatrice no longer pulled away when love made space for all of her. She had entered the mansion as a woman hired to care for a boy no one could reach. She stayed the heart that healed him, the courage that saved him, and the queen who never needed a crown to prove she belonged. A woman could survive years of being ignored, but there were some rooms cruel enough to make invisibility feel like a wound. The St. Aurelia Masquerade Ball was one of those rooms. A glittering New Orleans dream dressed in gold, velvet, candlelight, and lies. Behind every jeweled mask stood someone with a secret. Politicians smiled beside casino owners. Old money wives kissed the cheeks of men who paid for their husbands' campaigns. Criminals shook hands with judges under crystal chandeliers, while a string quartet played something soft enough to make sin look elegant. And in the middle of all that polished beauty, Maribel Vega stood alone, in a deep violet gown, wishing the marble floor would open beneath her and swallow her whole before anyone else noticed she had dared to exist. she had not wanted to come. Every part of her had begged for the safety of her small apartment, her old laptop, her quiet kitchen, and the stray dogs that waited behind her building every night, because they knew she always saved them pieces of chicken from dinner. But Crescent Dominion Financial had made attendance mandatory for senior staff, and Maribel was too valuable to excuse and too invisible to protect. She was a cybersecurity auditor, the kind of woman powerful men needed but rarely thanked. She found hidden doors in payment systems, traced fake vendors through broken code, and caught lies buried so deep inside financial networks that other auditors would have needed months just to notice the smell of smoke. She was brilliant, patient, and soft-spoken, with a mind sharp enough to cut through empires. But none of that mattered when she entered the ballroom and felt every thin, jeweled woman turn her head. At 240 pounds, Maribel had learned how to move through the world like an apology. She kept her shoulders rounded, her voice gentle, and her eyes lowered when strangers stared too long. She told herself she was practical, not ashamed. She told herself loose cardigans were comfortable, not armor. But tonight, for one foolish, trembling moment, she had wanted to feel beautiful. So she had saved for 3 months and bought the violet velvet gown from a boutique near Magazine Street, a dress that hugged her full chest, curved around her soft waist, and fell over her wide hips like moonlight over dark water. When she had looked in the mirror at home, she had almost smiled. Almost. Then she had arrived at Sant Aurelia and remembered that some rooms were built to remind women like her that confidence had a price. The ballroom was inside the old Bellevue Hotel, a historic palace of carved stone balconies, painted ceilings, and tall arched windows overlooking the misty bend of the Mississippi River. Spanish moss hung in the courtyard outside like ghostly lace. Inside, everything smelled of white roses, champagne, expensive perfume, and the sweet buttery desserts no one seemed brave enough to eat. Maribel held a crystal glass of sparkling cider in both hands and stood near a tall arrangement of lilies, trying to disappear behind flowers that cost more than her rent. Her mask was silver and delicate, tied with a ribbon that already felt too tight behind her head. Beneath it, her cheeks burned as laughter rippled around her from people who probably were not laughing at her at all. Still, her body knew the old fear. It did not wait for proof. She had just decided to leave quietly when Julian Voss noticed her. Julian was the kind of handsome that had never been forced to become kind. He had golden hair, a clean jaw, and the easy, lazy confidence of a man who had been forgiven before he ever apologized. His father, Sebastian Voss, owned hotels, casinos, restaurants, private clubs, and enough politicians to make laws feel like suggestions. Julian moved through the ballroom with a half-empty champagne flute and a smile that looked charming from far away and rotten up close. 2 friends followed him, both dressed in tuxedos, both eager to laugh before he even said anything. Maribel saw him looking at her from across the room, and a cold pressure settled in her stomach. "Well," Julian said, as he drifted closer, his voice carrying just enough to catch the attention of nearby guests. "I guess charity really does bring everyone out." Maribel tightened her fingers around the glass. She looked past him toward the exit. "Excuse me," she said softly. But Julian stepped in front of her, blocking the path with the graceful cruelty of someone who had practiced making people uncomfortable. His eyes moved slowly over her dress, not with admiration, but with the bright, mean interest of a boy holding a match over paper. "That's a brave dress," he said. "Really brave. I mean that. Most women would be scared to put velvet under that kind of pressure." A few people nearby went still. Someone gave a sharp little laugh and then tried to hide it behind a sip of champagne. Maribel felt the sound hit her harder than a slap. She had heard worse. She had survived worse. Office kitchens, school hallways, family gatherings, first dates that turned into stories men told their friends later. But something about the ballroom made the humiliation shine brighter. Maybe it was the chandeliers. Maybe it was the masks. Maybe it was the fact that she had tried, for once, not to hide. "I'm going to go," she whispered. Julian leaned closer, careful. The floor is antique. She tried to step around him. It should have been simple. One small movement, one quiet escape. But Julian's polished black shoe slid forward, catching the hem of her gown. At the same time, his shoulder shoved into hers with just enough force to make it look accidental to anyone desperate to believe rich men did not do ugly things on purpose. Maribel fell. The glass slipped from her hand and shattered against the marble. Cold cider splashed across her chest and down the front of her violet gown. Her palms struck the floor hard. Pain shot up her wrists. Her silver mask cracked against the stone and slid crooked across her face. For one stunned second, the entire ballroom went silent. The music kept playing, soft and sweet, and completely wrong. Then the laughter started, quiet at first. A few cruel bursts, a few gasps, dressed up as concern. Then more laughter, spreading like spilled ink through silk and diamonds. Maribel could not breathe. She pushed herself up on one hand, the broken edge of her mask scraping her cheek. Her eyes blurred, but she refused to cry. Not here, not in front of them. Julian stood over her with his champagne flute tilted in one hand, his mouth curved into a lazy grin. "I'd help you up," he said, loud enough for the nearest circle of guests to hear, "but I'm afraid you'd drag me down with you." The laughter rose again. High above the ballroom, behind the dark railing of a private balcony, Dante Romano stopped moving. He had been standing in shadow for most of the night, watching the crowd with the cold patience of a man who owned more of the city than the city itself knew. Publicly, Dante was a casino investor, a shipping magnate, and one of the largest donors to the St. Aurelia Foundation. Privately, he was the reason certain boats entered the port of New Orleans without inspection, the reason union bosses answered their phones after midnight, and the reason men with old family names lowered their voices when they spoke of the river. He controlled docks, gambling rooms, private security firms, and debts that could ruin a dynasty before breakfast. Everyone knew Dante Romano was dangerous. No one knew exactly how dangerous, and that was how he liked it. He had not come to the ball for champagne or charity. He had come because Sebastian Voss was getting bold, and bold men often made mistakes when they believed the music was too loud for anyone to hear them. Dante had expected politics, quiet threats, and perhaps a smile from an enemy pretending not to hate him. He had not expected Maribel Vega to walk into the room wearing violet velvet and fear. But he had noticed her months ago. The first time, her name had appeared in a report from his casino payment network. One of his men had flagged her as a possible threat after she uncovered a hidden digital ledger buried beneath layers of false vendor transfers. Maribel thought she had found corporate fraud. She had no idea she had stumbled across a trap set by a rival faction, hoping to frame Dante's organization for international money laundering. She had closed the gap without knowing what waited inside it. She had saved him without knowing his name. Dante had ordered a full investigation. He had expected ambition, blackmail, maybe a government connection. Instead, his men brought him a portrait that unsettled him more than any spy could have. Maribel Vega worked late. She took the streetcar when her car made strange noises because she was too careful with money to rush repairs. She bought dog food in bulk for animals that were not hers. She spoke gently to security guards and cleaning women. She ate lunch alone at her desk and pretended not to hear when younger analysts joked about her body from the break room. She was lonely, brilliant, careful, and far too unaware of the power sitting behind her quiet eyes. Dante had told himself he was watching because she mattered to his business. Then he had watched long after business stopped being the reason. Now she was on the floor, surrounded by broken glass, and rich people laughing as if cruelty were just another form of entertainment. Something old and violent moved through Dante's chest. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Cover the exits," he said. The two men behind him straightened at once. One touched his earpiece. The other moved toward the private stairwell. Below, the ballroom doors began closing, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a smooth finality that made several guests turn their heads. The laughter faded piece by piece as people noticed the men in black suits taking positions near every exit. The music faltered. A violinist missed a note. Conversations died. A strange fear rolled through the room before Dante had even stepped into it. Then he descended the curved staircase. Every eye followed him. Dante Romano was dressed in black from collar to cuff, his tuxedo cut with quiet perfection, his dark hair brushed back from a face too calm to be comforting. He wore no mask. Men like Dante did not hide behind feathers and silver paint. They made other people wish they had. As he crossed the ballroom, the crowd parted without being asked. Politicians looked away. Casino owners lowered their glasses. Old money women forgot to breathe behind jeweled masks. Julian's smile broke apart the closer Dante came. Maribel was still on the floor, one hand pressed against the marble, trying to gather enough strength to stand without showing how badly her wrists hurt. She did not notice him until the shadow fell over her. Dante did not look at Julian first. He did not look at the crowd. He lowered himself onto one knee in front of Maribel, right there among broken crystal and spilled cider, as if the floor of the St. Aurelia ballroom were worthy of him only because she was on it. "Maribel," he said softly. Her name in his voice stunned her more than the fall. She looked up through the cracked silver mask, and for a breath, the ballroom disappeared. His eyes were dark, almost black, and frighteningly steady. She should have been afraid of him. Some deep, sensible part of her was afraid. But there was no mockery in his face, no disgust, no polite pity, only focus. Complete, unwavering focus. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "I'm fine," she whispered, because that was what she always said when she was not fine at all. Dante's gaze moved to her shaking hands, then to the red mark blooming near her cheek, where the mask had scraped her skin. His jaw tightened. "That was not what I asked." Maribel swallowed hard. "My wrists hurt a little." His expression changed, barely, but the air around him seemed to go colder. He reached for her with surprising gentleness, sliding one hand beneath her elbow and the other around her back. "Then let me help you." She stiffened out of habit. "I'm heavy." Dante looked into her eyes, and the quiet rage in him softened into something almost tender. "You are not a burden." The words were simple, too simple, but they entered her like warmth entering a locked room. He helped her rise slowly, carefully, letting her lean on him without making a show of it. When she was standing, he removed his jacket and placed it around her shoulders, covering the wet front of her gown, with a care that made her throat ache. His jacket smelled like cedar, smoke, and rain. It was warm from his body. Around them, no one laughed now. No one even moved. Julian cleared his throat. "Mr. Romano, I'm sure this looks worse than it was. We were only joking." Dante turned his head at last. Julian took one step back. "A joke," Dante said. His voice was low, smooth, and almost gentle. That made it worse. Julian tried to smile. "Yes, just a stupid little joke. No harm meant." Dante glanced at the broken glass, the cider staining Maribel's gown, the cracked mask in her trembling hand. Then he looked back at Julian. "Jokes are only funny when everyone is laughing." The room went so silent Maribel could hear the faint hum of the chandelier lights. Julian's father was nowhere in sight, but several Voss associates had moved closer, their faces tight with alarm. Julian seemed to realize all at once that wealth, charm, and his father's name had brought him to the edge of something they could not pull him back from. "Mr. Romano," Julian said, his voice thinning. "I apologize. Truly, I didn't know she was with you." Dante's eyes sharpened. "That is the first honest thing you have said tonight." Julian blinked. "What?" You are not sorry you hurt her, Dante said. You are sorry you miscalculated. Two of Dante's men appeared beside Julian. They did not grab him violently. They did not need to. One placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Julian's face drained of color. Wait, Julian said. You can't do this here. Dante stepped closer, his voice dropping until only Julian and the nearest guests could hear. I can do this anywhere. Julian looked around for help, but the room had become a garden of statues. No one wanted to be seen saving him. No one wanted Dante Romano's attention turned their way. Dante gave a small nod. His men guided Julian toward a side exit. The young man tried to speak again, tried to laugh, tried to turn the whole thing back into something harmless, but fear had already ruined the performance. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Maribel stood frozen inside Dante's jacket, her body trembling from shock, embarrassment, and a strange rising confusion she could not name. She wanted to run. She wanted to hide. She wanted to ask why the most feared man on the Gulf Coast knew her name, and why he had looked at her pain as if it belonged to him. Dante turned back to her. The violence in his face eased, but it did not disappear. It folded itself away, waiting. Come with me, he said. I can't, she whispered, glancing at the crowd. You can, he said, and you should. Her eyes filled despite every effort to stop them. Everyone is staring. Dante offered her his arm. Then let them learn what it looks like when a queen leaves the room. Maribel should have refused. She should have asked questions. She should have remembered that dangerous men did not become safe simply because they were kind at the right moment. But the ballroom felt like a cage made of laughter, and Dante's arm felt like the only open door. So she placed her hand on him, and he led her out beneath the silent gaze of every person who had watched her fall. Outside, the humid New Orleans night wrapped around her like a dark silk shawl. An armored black car waited near the curb, engine running. The driver opened the door before they reached it. Dante helped her inside, then entered after her, filling the quiet space with controlled power. The doors shut, and the world became tinted glass, leather seats, and the soft vibration of the city passing by. For several minutes, Maribel said nothing. Her hands gripped the edge of his jacket. The cracked mask rested in her lap, like a broken version of the woman she had tried to be. You didn't have to do that, she finally said. Dante watched her from the other side of the seat. Yes, I did. No, she said, her voice small but strained. You don't understand. Men like Julian have been making me feel small my whole life. I'm used to it. His gaze darkened. That is not comfort, Maribel. That is damage. She looked out the window, blinking hard. Neon signs blurred past. Jazz spilled from a doorway somewhere on Royal Street. The city kept moving as if nothing had happened, as if her shame had not just cracked open in front of 100 strangers. I just wanted to get through the night, she whispered. I wanted to wear one beautiful thing and not regret it. Dante leaned forward slowly, careful not to startle her. Look at me. She did, though it took effort. You have spent your life apologizing for taking up space, he said. That ends now. A shaky laugh escaped her, half disbelief and half pain. You say that like it's simple. It is not simple, Dante said, but it is finished. There was something in the way he said it that made her heart beat harder. Not a suggestion, not comfort, a decision. Why do you know my name? She asked. Dante did not look away. Because you saved my empire once. Maribel stared at him. He told her just enough as the car moved through the city, past iron balconies and sleeping mansions, past streets wet with evening mist. He told her about the hidden ledger she had uncovered, the casino payment network, the rival faction that had tried to use his business as a trap. He told her she had found the thread no one else had seen and pulled it before the noose could tighten around him. Maribel listened with cold shock spreading through her chest. I thought it was internal fraud. It was more than that. And you've been watching me." Dante's silence answered before his words did. Yes, she should have been furious. Part of her was. But another part, the tired part that had spent years being unseen by people standing inches away, did not know what to do with the idea that someone like him had noticed everything. The car turned toward the river, where a private tower rose above the city with dark glass and golden lights. Dante's penthouse waited at the top, like a secret above the clouds. He told her it was for safety, that Julian's humiliation was no longer just a social cruelty, but a thread connected to larger tensions. Maribel barely understood. She was too tired, too shaken, too aware of the warmth of his jacket around her shoulders and the strange calm in his voice. But when the car stopped beneath the tower and Dante stepped out, his phone buzzed once. He read the message, and whatever softness had been on his face vanished. "What is it?" Maribel asked. Dante slipped the phone into his pocket. "Julian Voss is being taken somewhere he can think clearly." Fear stirred in her. "What are you going to do to him?" Dante looked toward the river, where the old sugar refineries sat in the distance like black bones against the night. "I am going to teach him the difference between embarrassment and terror." Maribel's breath caught. He turned back to her, and his voice softened again. "Just for her. You will be safe upstairs. My people will bring you anything you need. Food, clothes, a doctor for your wrists. Rest tonight." "And you?" Dante's eyes held hers for one long, unreadable moment. "I have business by the river." Then he touched her hand, gently, almost reverently, before walking away into the New Orleans dark, leaving Maribel Vega standing beneath the golden lights of his tower, with a cracked silver mask in one hand, his jacket around her shoulders, and the terrible feeling that the fall she had suffered in the ballroom was not the end of her old life. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. The penthouse above the river was too quiet for Maribel Vega to believe she was safe. The elevator had opened into a world of dark glass, soft lamps, polished stone, and silence so deep it felt almost underwater. A woman named Celeste, calm and elegant in a black suit, had guided her inside with the gentle firmness of someone used to frightened guests and dangerous orders. She had brought ice for Maribel's wrists, a warm towel for the scrape on her cheek, and a tray of food Maribel could not bring herself to touch. Everything was beautiful. Everything was expensive. Everything felt like it belonged to someone else. Maribel sat on the edge of a long, cream-colored sofa, with Dante Romano's jacket still around her shoulders, staring out through the windows at New Orleans glittering beneath her. The city looked soft from this high up, all golden streets and river mist, but Maribel knew better now. Down there, beneath the music and the old balconies and the warm night air, men were moving through the dark because of her. She told herself to breathe. She told herself Dante had men, money, power, and a name that made whole rooms go quiet. Julian Voss was cruel, but he was not Dante Romano. Sebastian Voss was powerful, but Dante had survived men like him before. Still, the warning moved through her mind like a small, cold hand pressing against the back of her neck. Dante had said he had business by the river. The old sugar refineries were by the river. Sebastian Voss owned land near the river. The ball had felt too perfectly cruel, too staged, too public. Julian had not only humiliated her, he had done it in a room where Dante was watching. Maribel stood so quickly the ice pack fell from her lap. Celeste looked up from near the kitchen. "Miss Vega, I need a laptop," Maribel said. Celeste hesitated. "Mr. Romano wanted you to rest." "I know what he wanted," Maribel said, and for once her voice did not sound small. "But I need a laptop now." Something in her tone must have carried the truth, because Celeste did not argue. Within minutes, one of Dante's men brought a matte black laptop, a secure access card, and a phone with no contact names, only encrypted numbers. Maribel sat at the dining table, pushed the untouched food aside, and opened the machine with shaking hands. The familiar glow of a screen steadied her more than any kind words could have. Fear was foggy. Code was clean. Panic was loud. Patterns were quiet. She logged into a private sandbox environment, using credentials Celeste gave her, then began pulling public records, shell company filings, casino transfer logs, court notices, campaign donations, property ownership maps, and the thin digital dust people left behind when they thought no one was looking. At first, all she found was the usual old money rot: hidden holding companies, inflated vendor contracts, casino revenue moved through hospitality subsidiaries, donations passed through charity boards before landing in political accounts. It was ugly, but it was not surprising. Then she found the cufflinks. Julian Voss had posted a close-up photo earlier that evening, showing off a pair of custom gold cufflinks shaped like tiny lions. Maribel found the image on a social account and zoomed in until the screen blurred. The cufflinks had looked expensive, but there was a small seam on one side, too clean to be decorative. She searched private luxury security suppliers, then black market tracking devices used for executive protection, then a database of intercepted product manuals that no one at Crescent Dominion had ever known she quietly kept. There it was, a microtransmitter small enough to fit inside jewelry, made for covert location tracking in high-risk negotiations. Her pulse began to pound. Julian had been carrying a tracker. That did not make sense if Dante's men had taken him by surprise. It made perfect sense if someone wanted Dante to follow him. Maribel dug deeper. She pulled satellite pings from a compromised logistics platform linked to Voss Security. She traced an outgoing payment from a Sebastian Voss holding company to a private contractor registered in Panama. The contractor had no real office, no real employees, and too many former military names buried in its insurance documents. A mercenary team. The final device ping appeared near an abandoned sugar refinery by the river, the same stretch of old industrial land where Dante had said he had business. For a moment, Maribel could not move. The city lights outside the window blurred, and she was back on the ballroom floor with laughter cutting into her skin. Julian's shoe on her gown, his shoulder against hers, his smile. Only now she saw the shape behind the cruelty. He had not just wanted to hurt her, he had been used to pull Dante out of the guarded heart of his world and into a place built for an ambush. Maribel grabbed the secure phone with numb fingers and called the first number on the screen. Dante answered on the second ring. "Maribel?" The sound of his voice almost broke her. It was calm, too calm, with faint wind behind it and the low hum of engines. "Do not go inside," she said. There was a pause. "What did you find?" "Julian has a tracker in his cufflinks. His father knows you took him. He wanted you to take him. Sebastian paid a mercenary team through a Panama contractor, and the last ping is at the refinery. Dante, it's a trap." The silence on the other end changed. It tightened. "How long ago was the payment made?" he asked. "Earlier today." "Before the ball?" A soft sound came through the phone. Not fear, not surprise. Something colder. "Stay in the penthouse." "No," she said, already typing with one hand. "Listen to me. There are service roads on the east side and a drainage tunnel under the south wall. If they're professionals, they will not come through the main entrance. They will cut the lights first and push you toward the loading floor." Dante did not interrupt her. That was when Maribel understood he believed her completely. "I'm sending the map now," she said. "Move your men away from the center of the building. The roof has weak support beams over the west bay. If they use flash charges, that side could come down." Through the phone, Dante spoke to someone else, his voice sharp and controlled. Then he came back to her. "You just saved my life again." "Save it fully," Maribel whispered. "Then come back." For the first time, his voice softened. "I will." The call ended. Maribel kept working, because stopping would have made her imagine too much. She found camera feeds near the river and forced her way into them one by one, moving through passwords, weak routers, old municipal systems, and forgotten maintenance portals. Grainy black and white images flickered across the laptop screen. The refinery appeared like a dead giant beside the water, all broken windows, rusted beams, and moonlit walls. A line of dark vehicles moved near the service road. Men stepped out with rifles tucked low against their bodies. Maribel's breath caught, but then another camera shifted, and she saw Dante's people moving before the attackers reached the south wall. Because of her warning, they were no longer waiting in the trap. They were becoming the trap. At the refinery, Dante Romano stood beneath the shadow of the old loading crane, while Julian Voss sat tied to a metal chair beneath a suspended cargo crate filled with heavy vault steel. Julian was pale, sweating, and shaking so badly the chair legs scraped the floor each time he moved. Dante had not touched him. He had not needed to. Fear had done more to Julian in 20 minutes than pain could have done in an hour. You thought making her fall was funny, Dante had told him before Maribel called. So I wanted you to understand the feeling of looking up and knowing something heavy can ruin you. Julian had cried then, not loudly, not with dignity. He had cried like a spoiled boy who had finally discovered the world could press back. Then Maribel's warning came, and the night changed. Dante moved his men into the shadows. The lights died across the refinery a few minutes later, just as she said they would. The mercenaries entered through the drainage tunnel and the east service road, just as she said they would. Their first shots tore through empty air, where Dante's men had been standing moments before. The old building filled with smoke, sparks, and the hard thunder of gunfire. Julian screamed from beneath the hanging crate, but no one came for him. His father's hired killers moved past him without even looking in his direction, and that was when Julian understood the deepest cruelty of the night. Sebastian Voss had not sent men to save his son. He had sent them to kill Dante and leave Julian as part of the mess. Dante fought like a man made of patience and wrath. He did not rush. He did not waste movement. He used Maribel's map the way another man might use a blade. When the attackers pushed toward the main floor, his men cut them off from the upper rail. When they tried to regroup near the west bay, the weak beams above them groaned, and Dante ordered his people back before the old roof gave way in a storm of dust and broken metal. By the time the sirens in the far distance began to wake the river road, the mercenary team was finished, scattered, trapped, or fleeing into a city that no longer had room for them. Dante walked back to Julian through the smoke. Julian sobbed when he saw him. "Please," he begged. "Please, I didn't know. My father told me to upset her. He said you'd overreact. He said he would handle the rest. I didn't know he would leave me here." Dante looked down at him, and for a long moment there was no mercy in his face. Then he crouched in front of Julian, not close enough to comfort him, only close enough to make sure he heard every word. "You are alive because Maribel Vega is better than both of us," Dante said. "If I were the man you deserved tonight, your father would be burying what was left of you by morning. But she is not cruel for sport, and I will not stain her name with your blood." Julian shook so hard he could barely speak. "What are you going to do to me?" Dante stood. Nothing. Somehow, that seemed to terrify Julian more. Dante turned away, as his men lowered the cargo crate, just enough for Julian to feel the air move above his head. Then they stopped it, leaving him alive, trapped in the memory of weight, helpless beneath the thing he had once mocked in another person. Dante left him there for the police, for his father, for the newspapers, and for the fear that would follow him longer than any bruise. When Dante returned to the penthouse before dawn, Maribel was still at the table. Her eyes were tired, her hair had slipped loose around her face, and 3 empty coffee cups sat beside the laptop. But she had not stopped. Screens were filled with documents, transfer lines, encrypted messages, names of officials, offshore account numbers, shell companies, and a complete map of Sebastian Voss's hidden empire. Dante entered quietly, but she felt him before she saw him. She stood so fast, the chair pushed back against the floor. "You're alive!" He crossed the room and took her face in both hands. There was dust on his sleeves and a thin cut near his temple, but his eyes were clear and fixed only on her. "Because of you." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city outside was turning blue with morning. Somewhere below, New Orleans was waking up to coffee, church bells, street sweepers, and headlines that had not yet been written. Maribel looked at the cut on his face, then at his hands, then back at the files behind her. "Sebastian Voss tried to frame you, kill you, and probably buy his way out of all of it," she said. Her voice was rough from exhaustion, but steady. "But he made a mistake." Dante brushed his thumb gently over her cheek. "What mistake?" Maribel looked at the glowing screen. "He built his empire on systems, and systems remember everything." By sunrise, the evidence was moving, not all to one place. Maribel was too careful for that. A complete package went anonymously to federal investigators who had been circling the Voss family for years, but could never find the door. Another went to a prosecutor who owed nothing to Sebastian. Another went to rival power brokers who had waited a long time to see the Voss name bleed. The files showed offshore accounts, illegal casino transfers, bribed officials, fake construction invoices, private security payments, and the attempted hit at the refinery. It was not a leak, it was a flood. Sebastian Voss tried to survive it. For a few weeks he smiled for cameras and called the accusations political. He gave interviews in tailored suits. He blamed rogue employees. He blamed foreign hackers. He blamed Dante Romano without saying his name. But every denial only opened another door Maribel had already unlocked. Accounts froze. Partners vanished. Politicians returned donations they had once begged for. Casino boards met in secret and removed his people before they could drag the whole business under. Federal agents arrived at his Garden District mansion on a gray morning, while news helicopters circled above the oak trees. Julian disappeared from public life soon after. Some said he was sent to a private clinic. Some said he left the country. Some said he never recovered from learning that his own father had used him like a bright little lure on a hook. Maribel did not ask Dante which rumor was true. She found she did not need to know. Julian had become small in her mind, not because she had forgiven him, but because he no longer had the power to decide how large she was allowed to feel. The months that followed changed everything. Maribel did not return to Crescent Dominion Financial. There was no desk waiting that could hold the woman she had become. Dante gave her an office first, then a security team, then access to the private financial architecture of the Romano world. But he never treated her like decoration. He brought her into meetings. He asked for her opinion in front of men who did not know what to do with a soft-spoken fat woman who could ruin them with a few calm sentences and a laptop. At first, some of them underestimated her. They saw her round face, her gentle voice, her body that did not match their narrow idea of power. Then she would find the missing payment, the hidden clause, the quiet betrayal, the soft spot in a rival's network. After that, they learned to sit straighter when Maribel Vega entered the room. Dante changed too, though only with her. To the city, he remained dangerous, polished, and impossible to read. With Maribel, he learned quiet. He learned that protection did not always mean standing in front of her. Sometimes it meant standing beside her while she spoke for herself. He still watched every room as if danger might grow teeth at any moment. But when his hand rested at the small of her back, it was not to steer her away. It was to remind the world that she had chosen to stay, and he knew the honor of that choice. 6 months after the St. Aurelia Ball, the Romano Crescent Tower opened on the land where the Voss Empire had once planned its next crown jewel. The building rose over New Orleans in black glass and warm gold light, a luxury casino and financial center with a rooftop garden that looked out toward the river. The opening gala was the most important event the city had seen in years. The same old families came. The same politicians came. The same polished women in glittering gowns came. They carried champagne and careful smiles, but this time the room felt different. The air held memory. When Maribel entered, the crowd went quiet. She wore a fitted black and gold gown, made for her body, not against it. The fabric curved over her full chest, held her waist, and flowed over her hips with rich, calm confidence. Her hair fell in soft waves over one shoulder. Diamonds glowed at her ears. She did not hide behind flowers. She did not look for the nearest exit. She walked beside Dante Romano with her head lifted, and every person who had once laughed, watched, whispered, or looked away, now saw exactly what they had missed. Dante stopped at the center of the room. The lights from the chandeliers shimmered across his black suit and her gold dress. He looked at the crowd, then at Maribel, and the cold power in his face warmed into something that belonged only to her. "Many people believe I built this tower after the fall of Sebastian Voss," Dante said, his voice carrying through the room. "That is not true. This tower exists because a woman saw what powerful men tried to hide. She saved my business before she knew me. She saved my life when others tried to end it. And she saved this city from an empire that had been poisoning it for years." Maribel's throat tightened. Dante took her hand. "This is Maribel Vega Romano, my wife, my strategist, my future, and the strongest person in this room." No one laughed. No one dared. But it was not fear that made Maribel smile. It was not revenge either, not exactly. It was the deep, steady wonder of standing in a room that had once tried to shrink her, and realizing she no longer needed it to make her feel beautiful. She had not become powerful because Dante loved her. She had always been powerful. Dante had only been the first dangerous man smart enough to kneel in the broken glass and see it. Later, when the speeches ended and the music softened, Dante led her to the balcony overlooking the river. The night was warm, and the city glowed beneath them like a secret finally told. Maribel rested her hands on the railing, feeling the wind move gently over her face. "Are you happy?" Dante asked. She looked back through the glass at the ballroom, at the people watching her with careful respect, at the tower built over the ashes of the family that had mocked her, at the man beside her, who had once mistaken protection for possession, and then loved her enough to learn the difference. "I am not hiding," she said softly. "That feels better than happy." Dante stepped behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, holding her with the quiet certainty of a man who knew he was holding the center of his world. Maribel leaned back into him, no longer apologizing for her softness, no longer afraid of her own space, no longer the woman on the floor, beneath laughter and broken glass. The river moved below them, dark and endless. The city whispered, the tower shone, and Maribel Vega Romano, once mocked for the weight of her body, now carried the weight of an empire, with grace, intelligence, and a calm, beautiful power no one in New Orleans would ever dare to underestimate again. At a billionaire Mafia boss's rehearsal dinner, the quiet maid was meant to disappear into the walls. She was meant to pour the wine, clear the plates, lower her eyes, and remember that rich people liked their servants silent. But when the bride turned her cruelty on the heavy-set woman holding the silver decanter, when she laughed in front of a room full of millionaires and ordered her to kneel, the air inside the dining room changed. It was not loud at first. It was not dramatic. It was the kind of change people feel before they understand it. A small pressure behind the ribs, a hush beneath the music, a strange cold moving under the tablecloths and candlelight. Because the woman in the charcoal uniform did not flinch like someone who was afraid. She went still like someone who was trying very hard not to remember what her hands used to do. The Castellano estate stood beyond the city, hidden behind iron gates, old trees, and a private road that curved through the dark like a secret. From a distance, it looked more like a museum than a home. 4 floors of pale limestone rose above the lawn, each window trimmed in black iron, each balcony watching the lake as if the house itself had been waiting for something for a very long time. The property stretched over acres of quiet land, where the grass was cut so cleanly it looked painted. There were gardens no guest ever walked through, a wine cellar kept colder than winter, and a kitchen so large that the staff moved through it like workers inside a small hotel. The house had seen presidents, judges, business kings, foreign guests, and men whose names never appeared on paper. But on this Thursday evening, it was hosting a different kind of danger. Not the men in dark suits standing near the walls, not the bodyguards listening through clear earpieces, not even Victor Castellano, the calm man at the head of the table whose family name still made half of Chicago lower its voice. The real danger was a woman carrying water through the room, as if she had no past at all. Zola Okafor had worked in that house for 14 months. To the guests, she was simply the senior housekeeper. To the staff, she was the woman who knew where everything belonged, from the old silver knives in the locked cabinet to the lavender soap Victor's late mother had ordered from France. She was 34 years old, tall, plus-sized, and steady in a way that made other people feel nervous without knowing why. Her dark hair was pulled back in a low knot. Her uniform was charcoal during the day and deep navy at night. She wore soft shoes that made no sound on marble. Her face was calm, her mouth polite, her eyes careful. She had the kind of smile that appeared only when required and vanished the moment it had served its purpose. It was not sadness exactly. It was training. Long ago, Zola had learned that too much expression could invite questions, and questions could open doors better left locked. She moved through the dining room with a silence that did not feel practiced until someone tried to follow it. One moment she was behind a chair pouring white wine. The next she was beside the sideboard replacing a folded napkin. The next she was gone completely. She never rushed. She never bumped a chair. She never let a glass touch the table too hard. Younger staff members whispered that she had ghost feet. The chef said she could hear a mistake from 3 rooms away. One of the security guards once joked that if Zola ever decided to rob the estate, no one would know until the house was already empty. Zola had heard all of it. She heard almost everything. She heard the nervous click of a guest's ring against a champagne flute. She heard the small lie in a man's laugh when he pretended to know what vineyard the wine came from. She heard the breath a woman took before saying something cruel. Listening was not a habit for Zola. It was the last piece of a life she had buried. In the life she had before this one, she had not cleaned floors or folded towels. She had stood in stairwells with blood drying on her sleeve, while men with false names whispered into radios. She had walked 3 steps behind ministers, ambassadors, engineers, informants, and people whose survival could change the shape of countries. She had learned how to notice the hand that stayed too long inside a jacket pocket. She had learned how to read a room by the exits people did not look at. She had learned how to smile in a hotel lobby while counting every camera, every mirror, every reflection in a wine glass. She had learned what a person looked like 1 second before they became dangerous, and she had learned that peace, real peace, was not something the world handed you. It was something you sometimes had to run toward with a new name, a packed bag, and a promise made in the cold. The promise had been simple: no more harm, no more closed rooms, no more choosing who lived, because there was no time to save everyone. On a rooftop far from Chicago, with the wind sharp against her face and her hands shaking so hard she could barely hold a cup of tea, Zola had promised herself that she would become ordinary if ordinary was the only safe thing left. She would wash sheets, she would polish glass, she would pour wine for people who never learned her full name. She would let them misunderstand her. She would let them pass her by. She would live quietly enough that the past might grow tired of searching. For 5 years, she kept that promise. She kept it when men snapped their fingers at her. She kept it when women looked at her body and decided she was slow. She kept it when children of rich families spilled juice on purpose, just to watch someone else kneel. She kept it because silence, for Zola, had become a kind of shelter. Victor Castellano was the only person in the house who never treated her like furniture. He was 36, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, and quiet in a way most dangerous men pretended to be but rarely were. His grandfather had built a logistics company from one truck and a stubborn will, and over the years that company had become a clean white wall in front of a darker empire. Victor had inherited both parts: the trucks, the warehouses, the shipping contracts, the old money, the blood debts, the men who waited for his orders. People called him a mafia boss, because that was the closest easy word. But Victor did not swagger. He did not shout. He did not laugh at cruelty. He remembered birthdays. He sent flowers when a staff member's mother died. He asked the gardener's son how school was going and waited long enough to hear the answer. At night, when the estate settled and the staff hallways grew soft and blue, Victor sometimes came down to the kitchen after everyone else had left. Zola would find him there in shirt sleeves, standing beside the counter, staring at nothing while the tea kettle hissed. He spoke to her more honestly than a man in his position should. He spoke of his father, who had taught him how to hold power without enjoying it. He spoke of the family business as if it were a house with beautiful rooms and a locked basement full of ghosts. He spoke of loneliness, not as a complaint but as a simple fact. Zola never gave him too much in return. She knew better, but she listened. Sometimes she answered with one quiet sentence that seemed to land inside him harder than a speech. Victor noticed that. Victor noticed everything about her silence. He did not yet understand what it meant. His fiancée, Geneviève Moreau, noticed only what served her. She was 28, French-born, polished to a shine, and beautiful in the careful way wealth can make beauty look effortless. Her family owned vineyards, hotels, and enough social connections to make newspapers kind. She entered rooms as if rooms had been built to receive her. She wore pale silk, diamonds at her throat, and a smile that looked warm until it reached her eyes and stopped. Geneviève believed in charm when people mattered, and sharpness when they did not. Staff, in her mind, were not people exactly. They were moving parts, hands that carried things, backs that bent, names that could be forgotten without guilt. The rehearsal dinner had been planned for months, and Geneviève had treated it like a royal event. She chose the candles, the flowers, the wine pairings, the menu cards, the seating chart, the music, and the exact shade of cream on the napkins. She had argued with the chef about sauce. She had corrected the florist twice. She had sent one server home for wearing the wrong shoes. Every detail was controlled, polished, and cold. By early evening, the long dining table glowed beneath a river of candlelight. 28 chairs were filled with people who had too much money to speak loudly about it. There were bankers, donors, old family friends, a retired judge, 2 men from the shipping board, a quiet woman from a children's hospital foundation, and a venture capitalist who kept checking the corners of the room as if expecting the walls to move. 2 guests watched Zola more closely than the rest. One was Arthur Castellano, Victor's uncle, a silver-haired man with a soldier's posture and eyes that had learned long ago never to soften in public. He sat near the far end of the table and held his wine like someone who had forgotten to drink it. Every time Zola passed behind him, his gaze followed her hands, her shoulders, the way she turned her wrist when setting down a glass. He did not look surprised. He looked haunted. The other was Dr. Helena Mwangi, a Kenyan neurosurgeon whose calm face gave away almost nothing. She had been invited by Victor after a hospital fundraiser, but Zola knew from the first moment their eyes met that Helena was no ordinary guest. Doctors saw injuries, soldiers saw exits. Helena saw both. All night, she watched Zola's hands, as if she had once read about them in a file she was never supposed to keep. The evening began beautifully, at least on the surface. The first course arrived beneath glass domes. The wine was poured. The guests smiled. Genevieve laughed at the right moments and touched Victor's arm whenever someone looked their way. Victor remained polite, though his eyes kept drifting toward Zola in the corners of the room. Something about her seemed tighter than usual. Not frightened, not upset. Just distant, as if a part of her had stepped away from the dinner before it even began. Zola poured, lifted, replaced, and vanished. She ignored the weight of Arthur's stare. She ignored the careful watchfulness of Dr. Mwangi. She ignored Genevieve's raised finger the first time it summoned her to the bride's chair. "This wine is too warm," Genevieve said without looking up. Her voice was light, sweet, and pitched just high enough for nearby guests to hear. Zola touched the bottle gently. "I can bring another, madam." Genevieve smiled at the table, not at her. "Do that, and try not to hover. It makes the room feel crowded." A few people looked down at their plates. Victor's jaw moved once, but he said nothing. Zola gave a small nod and stepped away. She had been called worse things than crowded. She had been called worse things by men who did not live long enough to regret it. A spoiled woman at a dinner table did not matter. A warm bottle of wine did not matter. The promise mattered. Peace mattered. So Zola brought another bottle, poured it without spilling a drop, and returned to the wall. But Genevieve had found an audience, and cruelty often grows bold when it feels watched. The bread was too uneven. The water was too cold. The sauce was too rich. The candle near her plate was too smoky. Zola was too close, then too far, then too slow, then too quiet. Each complaint was small enough to seem harmless by itself, but together they formed something ugly. The room began to hear it. The staff heard it first, then the retired judge, whose lined face tightened with quiet disapproval. Then the venture capitalist's wife, who stopped laughing at Genevieve's stories. Then Victor, whose hand closed around the stem of his glass until the crystal gave a faint warning sound. Zola did not react. She had spent years learning how not to. She kept her breathing even. She let the words pass over her skin without entering. Still, something old stirred beneath the stillness. Not anger. Anger was too simple. It was memory, the lifted finger, the public command, the casual way some people believed another human being could be made smaller just because money had taught them so. Zola felt the room sharpen around her. She counted exits without meaning to. Main door, garden door, service passage, kitchen hall, side entrance near the east corridor, security near the wine arch, 2 guards alert, 1 bored, 1 too young to be useful if real trouble came. She hated herself for noticing. She hated how easy it still was. By the 7th course, the dinner no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a room pretending not to hear a storm rolling closer. Conversations thinned. Laughter came late. Forks moved slowly. The chef, watching from the service entrance, folded his arms and shifted his weight. Arthur set down his glass and did not pick it up again. Dr. Mwangi touched the small silver pin on her lapel once, not pressing it, only resting her finger against it, as if remembering it was there. Zola saw the movement in the reflection of a dark window and felt a cold line move along her spine. Genevieve turned in the middle of a story about a charity auction she had almost attended and lifted her glass without looking. Zola stepped forward with the decanter. She poured. The red wine caught the candlelight and shone like a dark jewel. A single drop slid down the outside of the glass and landed near Genevieve's plate. Before Zola could reach for a cloth, Genevieve made a soft sound of disgust. "Honestly, Zola," she said, "is it so difficult to serve without making a mess?" The table went quiet again. This time, no one pretended not to notice. Zola lowered her eyes. "I will clean it." Genevieve leaned back, smiling now, enjoying the silence too much. "You always say that so calmly, like you are above everything." "It is strange, really. You work in my future husband's house, but you walk around as if the room belongs to you." Victor's voice came low from the head of the table. Genevieve. But she had crossed some inner line and liked the feeling of it. Champagne had warmed her pride. Attention had sharpened her teeth. She stood slowly, smoothing her silk dress, and every candle on the table seemed to tremble with her movement. "No, darling," she said to Victor, still smiling. "I am only asking for basic respect in my own home." It was not her home yet. Everyone knew it. Victor knew it. Zola knew it. Even Genevieve knew it, and that was why her voice had grown sharp. She walked around her chair and stopped in front of Zola. The two women stood a few feet apart, one wrapped in silk and diamonds, the other in a plain uniform with a silver decanter held in both hands. For a moment, the contrast was so clear it felt staged. Wealth and service, noise and silence. A woman who had always been seen, and a woman who had survived by not being seen at all. Genevieve looked Zola up and down slowly, letting her gaze linger on her broad hips, her full arms, the calm weight of her body. "You know," she said softly, though everyone heard her, "in my family's homes, staff understood their place. They did not drift around like shadows. They did not make guests uncomfortable. They did not forget who was paying them." Zola said nothing. The silence angered Genevieve more than any answer could have. She pointed toward the small red mark near her chair. "Clean it." Zola reached for the cloth folded over her arm. Genevieve's smile widened. "No, properly." The room seemed to hold its breath. Genevieve pointed to the floor. "On your knees." Victor stood so suddenly his chair scraped back across the marble. Arthur's face went pale. The retired judge set down her fork with a careful click. The venture capitalist closed his eyes, as if he had known this moment was coming, and had hoped to be wrong. Dr. Mwangi pressed the silver pin on her lapel once, so subtly that only Zola saw it. Somewhere near the wall, a young security guard looked toward his supervisor, confused by the sudden fear on the older man's face. Zola looked at the floor. Then she looked at Genevieve. Not quickly, not with fury, slowly, as if waking from a long sleep. Her eyes did not burn. They did not fill with tears. They went still in a way that made every person in that room understand, all at once, that they had never truly seen her before. The woman who had poured their wine was gone. In her place stood someone older than her years, someone with shadows behind her eyes, and a piece so thin it could split open with one wrong breath. Genevieve's smile faltered. Arthur whispered something no one near him could hear. Dr. Mwangi's hand remained on the pin. Victor took one step toward Zola, then stopped, because something in her face told him not to come closer. Zola set the silver decanter down on the table. The sound was soft, almost gentle, but in that room it landed like a warning. Then, before she could speak, before Genevieve could save herself by stepping back, before Victor could reach the woman he suddenly realized he did not know at all, a sound came from the east corridor. A deep crack, then another. The side entrance blew inward, and the old house filled with the heavy thunder of men who had come to kill everyone inside. The first thing the room lost was sound, not because it became quiet, but because fear swallowed every voice at once. The side entrance burst open with a sharp, violent crack, and the old estate seemed to breathe in around the damage. Wood splintered across the marble. Cold air rushed through the corridor. Candle flames bent sideways. A woman near the end of the table screamed, but the sound felt far away, like it belonged to another house on another night. Men in black masks moved through the broken doorway with calm, careful steps. They did not stumble. They did not shout. Their weapons were raised before their boots crossed the threshold. They entered like men who had studied the house, counted the guards, memorized the hallways, and believed they already knew how the evening would end. They had been told Victor Castellano was the only real threat inside the estate. They had been told the security team was thin because the dinner was private. They had been told the guests were wealthy, weak, and easy to control. They had been told the staff would freeze, cry, and obey. They had been told the heavy woman in the dark uniform was a housekeeper, nothing more than another soft shadow moving around the edges of a rich man's life. It was the kind of mistake men make when they think danger always looks like itself. It was the kind of mistake that gets made only once. Victor moved first, or tried to. His hand went toward Genevieve, pulling her behind the cover of a marble column as the guests ducked beneath the table. Chairs crashed backward. Glass shattered. Someone knocked over a candle, and wax spilled across the linen like pale blood. The retired judge slid down slowly, not from weakness but from experience. She knew panic got people killed faster than bullets. Arthur Castellano stayed seated for one heartbeat longer than everyone else. His old body had slowed over the years, but his mind had not. He saw the formation. He saw the lead man's shoulder angle. He saw the second man covering high and the third sweeping low. He saw all of it, and then he saw Zola. She had not ducked. She stood in the open space beside the table, one hand still near the silver decanter she had set down moments before. Her face had changed only slightly. The quiet mask was gone. In its place was something older, colder, and deeply sad. Not fear, not anger, recognition. She knew this kind of room. She knew this kind of entrance. She knew the breath before violence settled over a place and made every person inside it simple. Run. Hide, freeze, fight. The body always chose before the mind could argue. Down, Zola said. It was not a shout, it was not loud, but the word cut through the chaos so cleanly that people obeyed before they understood who had spoken. The chef dropped behind the service cart. A young server pulled another staff member to the floor. The venture capitalist dragged his wife under the table and covered her head with his arm. Dr. Helena Mwangi stepped behind a heavy chair, her eyes never leaving Zola. The first masked man turned his weapon toward Victor. Zola moved. For everyone watching, it was almost impossible to explain afterward. There was no grand leap, no wild attack, no noise that matched what they expected. She simply stopped being where she had been. 1 second she stood by the table. The next she was beside the lead man, close enough that his weapon had become useless. Her hand touched his wrist, soft and exact. Her shoulder turned. His balance vanished. He hit the wall hard enough to empty the air from his lungs, and before he could even fall, his weapon was sliding across the marble beneath Zola's shoe. The second man fired. The shot tore into the chandelier above the dining table, sending crystals raining down in a bright, deadly shower. Guests screamed and curled tighter under the table. Zola was already behind him. She caught the strap across his chest, twisted it once, and used his own forward motion to pull him down. His body struck the floor with a heavy thud. His weapon clattered away. She did not kick him. She did not strike him again. She only placed one knee between his shoulders and pressed just hard enough to make breathing uncomfortable and movement impossible. The third and fourth men hesitated. That hesitation saved lives and ruined them. They had expected guards. They had expected Victor. They had expected a room full of rich people begging. They had not expected a plus-sized maid with steady eyes to take apart trained attackers with the calm focus of someone folding linens. The third man swung his weapon toward her, but Zola lifted the fallen decanter with one hand and threw it, not at his face, but at the light above him. The glass shade burst. Darkness fell over his side of the room. Before his eyes could adjust, she was inside his reach. Her elbow touched his ribs, his legs folded. She took him down so gently it almost looked merciful. The fourth man backed toward the corridor, speaking into a radio clipped to his vest. Zola heard the code word before he finished it. She knew what it meant. More men outside, maybe not close, but ready. She grabbed a dinner knife from the table and sent it spinning across the room. It struck the radio, not his body, and the device sparked once before falling silent. Arthur inhaled sharply. He remembered that precision. He remembered a basement in Tunis, a young woman with smoke in her hair, and a decision made in seconds that had kept him alive for the next 21 years. The fifth man ran. He made it as far as the broken side entrance before Victor's chief guard finally came alive and stepped into his path. But Zola reached him first. She caught the back of his jacket, turned his body toward the wall, and guided him into it with enough force to end the fight but not his life. He slid down, groaning, his mask half torn from his face. Zola stood over him, breathing evenly, her hands open at her sides. No one in the room moved. No one wanted to be the first person to make a sound after seeing what they had seen. The whole thing had lasted less than a minute. All the armed men were on the ground. Some were conscious, some were stunned. None were dead. That was the part Arthur noticed first. It was the part Dr. Mwangi noticed too. Zola had not become careless. She had not become cruel. She had been faster than the danger, stronger than the panic, and controlled enough to spare the men who had come to murder strangers over old debts. The promise had not broken completely. It had bent. It had bent around the lives in the room and held. Genevieve was still on the floor behind the column, her silk dress twisted beneath her knees, one hand pressed to her throat. Her diamonds shook against her skin. The woman who had ordered Zola to kneel now stared up at her from the marble, and the room understood the shape of the moment without anyone saying it. A minute ago, Genevieve had believed power was a voice, a ring, a last name, a place at the table. Now power stood in front of her in a charcoal uniform, breathing quietly, eyes sad and ancient, hands empty. Victor stepped forward slowly. Zola. She turned at the sound of his voice. For the first time since he had known her, Victor did not see his housekeeper. He saw the lines beneath the calm. He saw the weight of years she had never offered him. He saw that every late-night silence in the kitchen had been holding back a history large enough to swallow the house. His face softened with awe, then hurt, then something close to fear. Not fear of her, but fear of how little he had understood. Dr. Mwangi came out from behind the chair. Her steps were careful, respectful. She stopped several feet away from Zola, as if approaching a wild animal that had once chosen not to bite. "It really is you," she said softly. Zola's eyes moved to the doctor's face. A faint memory passed through them. "Hello, Helena." The doctor let out a breath that sounded almost like grief. "I was told you were gone." "I was," Zola said, "for a while." Arthur stood then, slower than the others, one hand pressed against the table. His eyes were wet, though his voice remained steady. "You saved my life in Tunis," he said, "and tonight you saved his." Zola looked toward him, and for the first time all evening, her face showed pain. "You should not have put me here, Arthur." "I put you where no one would look," Arthur replied quietly. "That was what you asked for." The guests stared between them, trying to piece together a story that was far too large for the broken dining room. Victor looked at his uncle. "You knew?" Arthur did not look away. "I knew enough to keep quiet." Victor's jaw tightened. "Who is she?" Zola answered before Arthur could. She turned toward Victor, toward Genevieve, toward the guests hiding behind overturned chairs and trembling under the table. Her voice was low, but it carried. It did not ask for attention. It took it. "My name is Zola Okafor," she said. "For the past 14 months, I have worked in this house. I have managed your linens, your rooms, your meals, your flowers, your silver, and your schedules. Most of you never asked my name. Some of you heard it and forgot it. That was not an accident. I preferred it that way." No one breathed. "Before this house, I had another life. I protected people who were not allowed to be seen needing protection. I walked behind presidents, witnesses, doctors, ministers, and men with secrets large enough to start wars. I learned how to read danger before it entered a room. I learned how to stop it when it did. I did that work for 11 years. Then one day, I could not do it anymore. Not because I was afraid, because I was tired of surviving rooms no one should have had to enter. So I left. I made myself small. I made myself quiet. I promised I would never use my hands for harm again unless there was no other way. Her eyes shifted to Genevieve. I accepted every insult you gave me because I thought peace was worth the cost. I let you mistake my silence for weakness because I had earned the right to be silent. But silence is not permission. Service is not shame. A uniform is not an invitation to cruelty. And a person does not become less human because she is pouring your wine. Genevieve covered her mouth, and her face crumpled in a way no one there had ever seen. Not pretty, not polished, real. Zola looked at the fallen men, then back at the room. Tonight, I chose your lives over my promise. I hope that choice was worth what it cost. The silence after that felt deeper than fear. It felt like a room full of people being forced to meet themselves. The retired judge stood first. She was an old woman, proud and careful, but she pushed herself upright and walked toward Zola with both hands visible. She stopped before her and bowed her head. Not much, just enough to make the meaning clear. The venture capitalist followed, then his wife, then the chef, his white coat dusted with crystal and flour. Then the servers, then the guards. One by one, the people in the dining room stood and gave Zola the respect they should have offered before she had to earn it with danger. Genevieve was last. She rose with difficulty, her knees shaking, mascara streaked beneath her eyes. She looked smaller without her cruelty, younger too. She stepped toward Zola, then stopped, as if she knew she had no right to come closer. "I'm sorry," Genevieve whispered. Zola watched her for a long time. The apology was not enough. They both knew that. But it was the first honest thing Genevieve had said all evening. Zola nodded once. Then she turned away. Victor followed her into the service hall, past the kitchen, past the staff rooms, past the narrow staircase where the noise of the dining room faded into a dull hum. Zola walked without running. She entered her small room, took a leather bag from beneath the bed, and packed with the calm speed of someone who had left many places before, a change of clothes, a passport, a wooden box no larger than a book. Victor stood in the doorway, saying nothing, because for once he understood that speaking too quickly would only prove he had learned nothing. When she tried to pass him, he stepped aside. Only then did he ask, "Where will you go?" Zola looked down the back hallway toward the door that opened onto the garden and the cold lake air beyond it. Somewhere quiet. "This can be quiet," Victor said. She almost smiled. "No, Victor, this house was never quiet. It only knew how to whisper." He swallowed hard. "Will I see you again?" Zola looked at him then, really looked at him. She saw the man beneath the empire, the boy beneath the name, the lonely weight he had carried without knowing how to set it down. She had liked him. That was the danger. She had liked him more than she had allowed herself to admit. "Maybe," she said, "but not because you find me, because I choose to return." Then she walked out the back door and disappeared into the dark beyond the garden. By morning, the estate had been cleaned, but not healed. The broken side entrance was boarded up. The shattered chandelier was taken down piece by piece. The police came and left with careful questions and even more careful answers. Victor released a short statement saying there had been a security incident and everyone was safe. He did not mention Zola. No one did. Even the guests who loved gossip seemed to understand that some stories were not theirs to sell. The men who had attacked the estate talked before sunrise. Fear does that to men who believe they have seen a ghost. They named the rival family that had hired them. They named the broker who had sold the estate layout. They admitted they had been promised an easy job, a rich target, and frightened staff. Within days, the men behind the attack were gone from the boardrooms, back rooms, and restaurants where they had once felt untouchable. Some were arrested, some fled. Some simply discovered that the city had closed its doors to them all at once. Victor did not need to raise his voice. He only needed to let people know that the Castellano house had been entered, and that everyone responsible would spend the rest of their lives wishing they had chosen another door. Genevieve left Chicago before winter ended. At first, she tried to return to the life she understood. The cameras, the charity boards, the clean white smiles. But people remembered the dinner. Not the details, because those had been buried, but the feeling. The whisper that she had humiliated the wrong woman. The whisper that Victor Castellano had ended the engagement without a public fight, without a scandal, without one cruel word. That hurt her more than anger would have. Anger would have made her important. Silence made her small. Over time, her invitations grew fewer. Her name appeared in gossip columns, then less often, then only when old photographs needed a caption. The world that had once clapped when she entered a room learned how quickly it could look away. Arthur lived 2 more years. He spent those years quieter than before, but softer. He wrote letters he never sent. He visited the kitchen more often and learned the names of every person who worked in the estate, not because Victor ordered it, but because shame had finally taught him tenderness. In his study, he kept an old photograph on his desk. A younger Arthur stood beside a young woman in a city far from Chicago. She was smiling in the picture, but not fully. Her eyes were already watching the edge of the frame. On the back, in faded ink, he had written that she had saved his life. Before he died, he added one final line beneath it. She saved us again, and still asked for nothing. Zola did come back, but not quickly. She returned first as a visitor, months later, when the trees around the estate were green again, and the lake shone bright under a clean afternoon sky. Victor saw her from the study window walking up the garden path with the leather bag still in her hand. He did not run to her. He wanted to. Every part of him wanted to. But he walked slowly to the back door and opened it before she knocked. "You waited," she said. "I listened," he answered. That was the beginning, not a kiss, not a promise. Not some grand demand made by a powerful man who was used to owning whatever he wanted. It began with tea in the kitchen. It began with long pauses and careful honesty. It began with Victor learning that love was not protection if it became a cage. It began with Zola learning that being seen did not always mean being hunted. Some nights she left before sunset. Some nights she stayed until morning. Some weeks she vanished to the coastal house Arthur had left her, a small place with white curtains, old floors, and wind that smelled of salt and rain. Victor never followed unless invited. That was the first promise he kept. Years passed, and the Castellano estate changed in ways money alone could never have changed it. The staff dining room was rebuilt with windows facing the garden. Every person who worked in the house had a seat at the table, not in words, but in practice. No guest was allowed to snap fingers, raise voices, or treat a uniform like a wall. Victor changed the business too, slowly and carefully, cutting away the ugliest parts of the empire he had inherited, until the name Castellano began to mean something different. Not clean, because old blood does not wash out in one season, but better, more honest, less hungry. He listened before he spoke. He apologized when he failed. And when he finally asked Zola to marry him, he did it on the balcony at dusk, with no witnesses, no diamonds large enough to feel like a purchase, and no speech about saving her. Zola said yes after making him promise 3 things. That he would never mistake quiet for consent, that no person under his roof would ever be invisible unless they chose to be, and that when they had children, if life gave them that gift, he would tell them the truth about the night their mother stood in a dining room and taught powerful people what power really was. The last dinner was held in the same room where everything had changed. The chandelier had been replaced, but Zola still knew where the bullet had struck the ceiling. The marble had been polished, but she still knew where the wine had fallen. There were candles again, and flowers, and music low enough to let people speak. Victor sat at the head of the table, older now, calmer. his hand resting near Zola's but never trapping it. Zola sat beside him in deep blue silk, her hair loose at her shoulders, her body no longer hidden inside a uniform or apology. She did not look like a woman pretending to belong. She looked like the room had finally understood it belonged to her too. In the corner stood a young housekeeper named Nia, newly arrived from Lagos, careful with her hands and quiet, in a way Zola recognized before the girl ever spoke. Nia had a thin resume, a small bag, and a smile that stopped just short of trust. During her interview, Zola had watched her fold a napkin for several minutes, without once looking up to check if she was being judged. Only someone who had lived under hard eyes knew how to do that. Only someone carrying a hidden story knew how to make silence look that neat. Across the room, Nia glanced up. Zola met her eyes and nodded once. It was not a command. It was not a warning. It was a message passed from one quiet woman to another. I see you. You are safe here. You do not have to prove your worth by bleeding for people who should have respected you before they knew your strength. Nia looked down quickly, but not before the smallest real smile touched her face. And that was how the story of Zola Okafor lived on. Not only in rumors about the night armed men broke into a Mafia boss's estate and were stopped by the woman no one had bothered to see. Not only in Victor's softer voice, or Genevieve's forgotten name, or Arthur's old photograph. It lived in the way the house changed after her. It lived in the way staff were greeted in the morning. It lived in the way no guest ever raised a finger again without feeling the room go cold. It lived in the children Victor and Zola would someday raise to understand that respect is not a reward for beauty, money, power, or noise. It is the first thing every human being is owed. Because the loudest person in the room is rarely the strongest, the cruelest person is rarely the most powerful, and the one pouring water, folding linen, carrying trays, cleaning floors, or standing quietly by the wall may be holding more history, more courage, and more pain than anyone at the table could survive. So if you had been at that dinner, what would you have done when Genevieve ordered Zola to kneel? Would you have looked away like everyone else, or would you have stood up before the world forced her to? Let us know in the comments, and do not forget to subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And the next time you pass someone who seems quiet, ordinary, or easy to ignore, remember Zola. Be kind, be respectful, because you never really know what kind of strength someone is carrying beneath the surface. Nobody at the Bella Vita Opera House noticed the woman carrying the broken gowns, not the senators laughing under the gold balconies, not the actresses posing near the marble stairs, not the millionaires hiding their sins behind crystal glasses and bright smiles. They noticed the silk. They noticed the diamonds. They noticed the cameras, the champagne, the masks painted with silver feathers and tiny black stones, but they did not notice Mara Bellamy, because Mara had learned a long time ago that poor women were only seen when someone needed someone to blame. The charity masquerade was supposed to be the most beautiful night of the year. Outside, black cars slid up to the curb like shadows with headlights, letting out women in gowns that cost more than Mara made in 6 months, and men whose faces appeared on news channels whenever money needed a friendly smile. Inside, the old opera house glowed like a palace. The ceiling was painted with angels. The stage curtains hung in heavy red folds. Music drifted from a string quartet near the grand staircase, soft enough to sound expensive and sad enough to make people feel important. Every corner smelled like white roses, polished wood, perfume, and the faint cold fear that always followed powerful people when they gathered in one room. Mara moved through all of it with a sewing kit in one hand and a rack of costume pieces in the other. Her black worker's dress pulled tight across her stomach when she bent. Her shoes pinched her feet. Her curls were pinned back so quickly that one dark strand kept slipping loose against her cheek. She had been there since early morning, steaming gowns, sewing beads back onto sleeves, fixing a torn zipper on a celebrity's dress, while the woman talked over her, as if Mara were part of the furniture. That was the way the rich liked their workers. Quiet, useful, invisible. Mara was not invisible because she was small. She was soft and full-bodied, with thick arms, wide hips, and a face that still held a quiet kind of sweetness, no matter how tired she was. But the world had a strange way of looking straight at a woman like her and deciding she did not count. Men moved around her, as if she took up too much room. Women with sharp cheekbones and sharper tongues smiled at her in a way that made her feel like an apology. Tonight was no different. A guest had already asked if she was allowed near the designer gowns with those hands. Another had laughed when Mara knelt to fix a hem and whispered that the opera house must be hiring anybody now. Mara had swallowed all of it. She always did. There were bills waiting at home, and Toby needed medicine, and medicine did not care about pride. Her younger brother had been born with a weak heart, and a smile so bright it made every hospital room feel less grey. He was 17 now, tall and thin from too many treatments, but he still called Mara his brave one, even though she never felt brave. Brave people had choices. Mara had rent, debt, and a phone that made her chest tighten every time the hospital number flashed across the screen. Near the stage, the costume display had been set up like a dream. Pearl masks, velvet cloaks, jeweled gloves, old opera dresses under glass, all borrowed from private collectors for the evening. A young intern named Lila was arranging a tray of pearl strands beside the display, her hands careful but shaking. She was a small girl with nervous eyes, wearing a plain black dress and a little gold locket at her throat. Mara had noticed her earlier, not because Lila looked important, but because Lila kept saying thank you to the workers. That alone made her stand out in a room where kindness was rarer than diamonds. Then the tray slipped. It was not a loud sound at first, just a soft scatter, like rain made of glass. Pearls rolled across the polished floor, bouncing under the stage lights, slipping between shoes that cost enough to feed families. Lila gasped and dropped to her knees at once, trying to gather them before anyone saw. But someone had seen. Vivian Caro turned from the circle of donors around her. The room seemed to change temperature. Vivian was the kind of woman people called elegant, because they were too afraid to call her cruel. She was tall and thin, wrapped in pale silver satin that made her look like a blade. Her blonde hair was swept up under a diamond mask, and her mouth held a smile that never reached her eyes. She was the hostess of the masquerade, the wife of Roland Caro, a casino owner with clean cufflinks and dirty money. Everyone knew the Caros were in trouble. Everyone knew tonight mattered, but no one said it out loud, because rich people had a talent for pretending the floor was not cracking beneath them. "What did you do?" Vivian asked. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. People turned. Cameras turned. Lila froze on the floor with pearls in her open hands. "I'm sorry," Lila whispered. "I can fix it. You can fix it," Vivian repeated, taking one slow step closer. "You can fix being useless in front of half the city?" A few guests laughed softly, the kind of laugh people used when they wanted to be close to power. Lila's face went white. She tried to stand, but Vivian grabbed her by the arm, fingers tight enough to leave marks. "Do you know what these pieces are worth?" Vivian hissed. "Do you know whose evening you just embarrassed?" Lila shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "Please, I didn't mean..." Vivian shoved her. It happened fast, but the room watched slowly. Lila stumbled backward, hit the edge of the stage, and fell hard to the floor. Her little gold locket snapped from her neck and skidded across the marble, spinning once before coming to rest near the toe of Adrian Caro's polished shoe. Adrian laughed. He was Vivian's son, handsome in the careless way of boys who had never feared consequences. He wore a black mask pushed up on his forehead and held his phone out in front of him, already live streaming. "Looks like the charity entertainment finally started," he said, grinning at his screen. "Everybody say hello to the disaster intern." More phones rose. That was the part that made Mara's stomach turn. Not the shove, not even Vivienne's voice. It was the phones. It was the way people did not move to help the girl on the floor. They moved to get a better angle. A senator's wife lifted her champagne higher, so it would not spill while she laughed. A man with a red pocket square stepped over Leela's hand, as if she were a dropped napkin. Someone whispered that poor girls should not be trusted near valuable things. Leela reached for the locket, but Adrian placed one shiny shoe beside it, not touching it, just close enough to make her stop. Mara felt something old and tired rise in her chest. She thought about Toby in his hospital bed. She thought about every manager who had spoken to her like she was slow because her body was large. She thought about all the times she had lowered her eyes because she needed the job. She thought about how easy it was for people with money to turn another human being into a joke. Then she stepped forward. The sound of her shoes on the marble was small, but in her own ears it felt like thunder. She crossed the open space, bent down, and picked up the broken locket before Adrian could stop her. The gold chain lay split in her palm, delicate and warm from Lila's skin. Mara turned her back on the watching crowd and offered her free hand to the girl. "Come on, sweetheart," Mara said softly. "You're okay." Lila stared at her like she had just been pulled from deep water. She took Mara's hand. Mara helped her stand, then placed the locket gently into her trembling fingers. Vivienne's smile vanished. "And who are you supposed to be?" she asked. Mara looked at her. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat, but her voice stayed quiet. "Someone who still knows how to help a person off the floor." A murmur moved through the room. Not loud, not brave, just surprised. Vivienne stepped closer, her silver gown whispering against the marble. Her eyes swept over Mara's body, slow and mean, pausing at her stomach, her hips, her cheap uniform, the loose thread near her sleeve. "You work in wardrobe," she said. "That means you touch the dresses, not the guests. Don't confuse proximity with importance." Mara felt the words land. They were designed to hurt. Vivienne had probably spent her whole life learning where to cut. "I'm not confused," Mara said. "I know exactly what I am." Adrian turned his phone toward her. "Oh, this is getting good." Vivienne's mouth curled. "Do you? Because from where I stand, you are a fat little wardrobe girl who forgot her place in a room full of people who actually matter." The laugh that followed was bigger this time. It rolled through the room like something dirty. Mara felt heat crawl up her neck. She knew what they saw. A poor woman in worn shoes, a body they thought gave them permission to speak, a worker who should have stayed bent over torn hems and broken zippers. Her hands tightened around Lila's shoulder, but she did not step back. "Expensive gowns can make people look beautiful from far away," Mara said. "They cannot hide what is ugly up close." The room went still. For one strange second, no one laughed. Even Adrian's grin faltered. Lila looked at Mara with wide, wet eyes. Somewhere near the front row, the string quartet missed a note, the soft music bending out of shape. Vivienne's face changed. The cruelty did not leave it. It sharpened. "You think that was clever?" she asked. "No," Mara said. "I think it was true." Vivienne lifted one hand, and two security guards moved from the side doors. Big men in black suits, trained to follow money before conscience. "Remove them," Vivienne said. "Both of them. And do not take them through the service hall. Take them through the main doors. Let everyone see what happens when trash forgets it is trash." Lila began to shake again. Mara turned her gently toward the exit. She wanted to leave before this became worse, before the job disappeared, before the hospital called again, before her courage cost her something she could not afford. But Vivienne stepped into their path. "No," Vivienne said, smiling again. "Slowly. I want them to understand the lesson. Adrian moved closer, phone held high. "Wave to the viewers," he said. "Tell them how it feels to get thrown out of a charity gala." Then Lila's phone rang. The small sound sliced through the thick silence. Lila flinched so hard she almost dropped it. She looked down at the screen, and whatever she saw made the blood drain from her face. Mara saw only one name before Lila rejected the call. Nico. Adrian noticed too. "Nico?" he said, laughing. "What is that? Your secret prince? Did the poor little intern invent a boyfriend to come save her?" More laughter. Lila shoved the phone into her pocket, eyes lowered, lips pressed together like she was holding in something dangerous. Before Mara could ask her anything, Mara's own phone began to ring. She knew the sound before she saw the screen. St. Agnes Medical Center. Everything inside her went cold. She stepped away from Lila, turning slightly from the crowd as she answered, "This is Mara." The nurse on the other end spoke gently, which made it worse. Toby's condition had changed. His heart was struggling. The doctors did not want to wait until morning. They had a surgical team ready tonight, but the remaining payments still had to be cleared before the procedure could begin. They were sorry. They knew Mara had been trying. They knew she had already paid so much. Mara's hand went numb around the phone. The opera house blurred. The lights became stars behind water. She heard herself ask how much was still owed, even though some part of her already knew the number would be impossible. When the nurse answered, Mara closed her eyes. For the first time that night, her calm cracked. She had worked until her feet swelled. She had skipped meals. She had sewn costumes by day and cleaned offices by night. She had sold her mother's bracelet, her winter coat, and almost every small thing her father had left behind. Still, it was not enough. It was never enough. Toby was lying in a hospital bed across the city, waiting for a surgery that could save him, and Mara was standing under gold ceilings while strangers laughed at the shape of her body. The shame of it nearly brought her to her knees. Vivian watched her face with slow satisfaction. "Trouble at home?" she asked sweetly. "How sad. Perhaps next time you will remember not to risk employment for a girl who drops pearls." Mara lowered the phone. Her breath came in shallow pulls. She wanted to answer. She wanted to say something brave, but fear had wrapped both hands around her throat. And in that fear, the past opened. 7 years earlier, on a stormy night near the docks, Mara had been working alone at a small laundromat with flickering lights and machines that groaned like tired animals. Rain slapped the windows, thunder shook the street. She had been closing late, counting the little money she had saved for rent, when she heard a sound behind the building. At first, she thought it was a stray dog. Then she found the man. He was slumped beside the back wall, bleeding through a torn shirt, soaked from the rain, his face pale beneath dark hair. He tried to raise a hand when she came close, but he was too weak. Mara should have run. Every smart part of her told her to lock the door and call the police. But there were voices down the street, rough voices, men searching through the storm. The wounded man looked at her once, and in his eyes she saw no power, no threat, no name, only pain. So she dragged him inside. He was heavy, and she was crying by the time she got him behind the washers. She cleaned his wounds with towels and cheap first aid supplies from the office. She gave him water, then soup from her own thermos. When the men came to the front window and asked if she had seen anyone, Mara shook her head and kept her body between them and the back room. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to grip the counter to hide it. By dawn, the stranger could stand. He asked her name. She told him only Mara. He asked why she helped him. She said because he was dying, and she had not yet learned how to walk away from that. Before he left, she pressed her rent money into his hand, then unclipped the silver saint medal her father had worn before he died. The stranger tried to refuse it, but Mara closed his fingers around it. "Sell it if you have to," she had told him. "Just live." The next morning, the laundromat owner found the missing cash and supplies. Mara was accused of stealing. She could have told the truth. She could have said a wounded man had been there, that men had been hunting him, that she had saved a life. But if she spoke, those men might find him, so she stayed silent. She lost the job, then her name. People near the docks began calling her a thief. After that, good work became hard to find. Every interview ended when someone made a call. Every landlord asked for more money up front. Every year since then, Mara had told herself that kindness was still worth it. But tonight, standing beneath the painted angels of the Bella Vita Opera House, with Toby's life hanging by a bill she could not pay, she wondered if kindness had only taught the world how to take from her. The security guards stepped closer. Lila clung to Mara's sleeve. Vivian smiled for Adrian's camera. Then the great doors of the opera house opened. A cold hush passed through the room before anyone spoke. It started at the back, near the entrance, where the guests turned one by one and forgot how to breathe. Phones lowered. Laughter died. Even the music stopped, one violin note fading into nothing. A man entered beneath the chandelier light, dressed in black, with a face the city knew even if no one dared say his name too loudly. Nico Moretti had arrived. Nico Moretti did not need to raise his voice to make a room afraid. He only had to enter it. The Bella Vita Opera House had been loud only seconds before, full of laughter, whispers, music, and the soft, cruel thrill of people enjoying someone else's pain. But when Nico stepped beneath the great chandelier, every sound seemed to fold into silence. The guests nearest the doors moved away without being told. Men who had spent their lives believing money made them untouchable suddenly found something interesting on the floor. Women in diamond masks lowered their phones. Even Adrian Caro, who had been smiling into his live stream like a boy born without shame, slowly brought the camera down as if his hand had forgotten how to hold it. Nico moved through the crowd with 3 men behind him, but somehow he seemed more dangerous than all of them together. He wore a black suit cut so perfectly it looked less like clothing and more like armor. His dark hair was brushed back from a face that might have been handsome in another life if it had not been made so cold by power. There was no rush in his walk, no anger in his expression. That made it worse. Angry men could be reasoned with, sometimes. A calm man with Nico Moretti's name behind him was something else entirely. Vivian Caro's husband, Roland, hurried forward from near the champagne table. His smile looked weak and wet. "Mr. Moretti," he said, spreading his hands as if welcoming an honored guest instead of a storm. "We were beginning to worry you had been delayed. The private room is ready whenever you are. We have everything prepared for the discussion." Nico did not look at him. He walked past Roland as if the man were a coat rack. He walked past Vivian, past the donors, past the celebrities pretending they had not been laughing. His eyes stayed fixed on the girl near the stage, the young intern with tears on her face and a broken gold chain clutched in her fingers. Lila seemed to shrink when she saw him. Her lips trembled. "Nico," she whispered. The name moved through the room like a match dropped onto dry paper. Nico stopped in front of her. For one strange second, the most feared man in the city looked at no one else. He looked only at Lila. His cold face softened in a way so sudden that Mara almost forgot to breathe. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Lila tried to answer, but her mouth folded and she began to cry. Nico reached out, gentle as a man touching something breakable, and took the small locket from her hand. The chain had snapped near the clasp. He studied it for a moment, then passed it to one of his men without looking away from Lila. "Fix it," he said quietly. The man nodded and stepped back. Vivian's face had gone pale under her silver mask. Adrian looked from Lila to Nico and back again, his phone now hanging uselessly at his side. Roland let out a nervous laugh. There must be some misunderstanding. The girl had a small accident with the display. My wife was only handling the situation. Nico finally turned his head. Roland stopped talking. "This girl," Nico said, his voice low and clear enough for the whole opera house to hear. "Is my sister." The room went still, in a deeper way than before. It was not just silence now. It was the sound of people realizing that the joke had turned into a knife pointed back at them. Lila wiped her cheeks quickly, embarrassed even in her pain. "I told you not to come," she said softly. "I wanted to do this on my own." "I know," Nico said. "And I let you, because you asked me to." His eyes moved over the room then, slow and sharp. "But I did not let them touch you." Lila's chin trembled. "She helped me," she whispered, turning toward Mara. "Mara helped me when nobody else did." For the first time, Nico looked at Mara. It was not the kind of look she was used to. It was not quick, dismissive, or cruel. It did not slide over her body looking for something to mock. It stopped on her face and stayed there. Mara felt herself grow still under it. The fear in her chest shifted into something stranger, something almost like memory. Nico's eyes narrowed a little. Mara looked away first. She did not know why his stare made her heart beat so strangely. Maybe because he looked at her as if he knew her. Maybe because there was a small line between his brows now, like something from long ago had stepped out of the dark and stood in front of him wearing a black worker's dress and worn shoes. Then Mara rubbed her wrist. It was a small nervous habit, one she had carried for years. When she was scared, her thumb found the inside of her wrist, pressing lightly against the place where her pulse lived. She did not know she was doing it until Nico's entire expression changed. He took one step closer. Mara's breath caught. Nico reached beneath the collar of his shirt and pulled out a silver chain. At the end of it hung a small saint medal, old and scratched, the edges worn soft from years of being touched. Mara stared at it. The room disappeared. Rain. The laundromat. Blood on white towels. A stranger's hand closing around her father's medal. Her own voice telling him to sell it if he needed money. The next morning, the accusation, the lost job, the years of people calling her a thief. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Nico's voice was almost a whisper. "Mara." No one in the opera house moved. "You remember," she said. "I remember everything." His hand closed around the medal, but not to hide it, to hold it steady. 7 years ago, near the docks, I was bleeding behind a laundromat, while men searched the street to finish what they started. I had no money, no weapon, no name I could safely give. I was nothing but a dying man in the rain. He looked around the room, and his voice grew colder. "And this woman, the one you mocked, the one you called trash, dragged me inside and saved my life." Vivian's mouth opened, but no words came. Nico continued, every sentence quiet and heavy. "She cleaned my wounds. She hid me from men who would have killed us both. She fed me. She gave me the money she had saved for rent. And when I left, she gave me this." He lifted the medal. "Her father's saint. She told me to sell it if I had to. She gave away one of the last things she had, because she believed my life was worth saving, even though she did not know who I was." Mara felt tears burning her eyes, not because she was ashamed, not this time, because someone had finally said the truth out loud. Nico looked at her again, and now there was something dangerous in his calm. Not danger toward her, never toward her. It was the kind of danger that circled a wound and looked for who had made it. "What happened to you after?" he asked. Mara could not answer. Her throat felt too tight. Lila answered for her, voice small but brave. "They accused her of stealing. She lost everything because she kept your secret." Nico closed his eyes for a single moment. When he opened them, the softness was gone. He turned to Roland Caro. "The alliance is over." Roland looked as if the floor had vanished beneath him. "Mr. Moretti, please, let us speak privately. Whatever my wife said, whatever happened here tonight, we can make it right." "No," Nico said. "You cannot." Vivian stepped forward, pride fighting terror across her face. "This is absurd. You cannot destroy a family over a wardrobe assistant." Nico looked at her the way a judge might look at a sentence already signed. I am not destroying your family over a wardrobe assistant. I am destroying it because you showed me exactly who you are when you thought there would be no cost. He lifted one hand, and one of his men stepped closer with a phone already open. Nico gave orders so softly that the people in the front rows leaned in without meaning to. Withdraw our protection from every Caro casino. Call the banks holding their quiet debts. Send the documents to every partner who thinks Roland Caro is still stable. Freeze the private club accounts by morning. And get the full security footage from the opera house. Adrian swallowed hard. You can't use that. I was live streaming. I can delete it. Nico's eyes moved to him. You already gave the city what it needed. Adrian looked down at his phone as if it had become poison. Nico's man returned with Lila's locket fixed. Nico took it and placed it carefully around his sister's neck. Lila touched it with shaking fingers, crying silently now. Then Nico turned back to Mara. You received a call, he said. Mara blinked at him. The hospital, he said. St. Agnes, your brother. The words broke what little strength she had left. But Toby needs surgery, she whispered. Tonight. I don't have enough. Nico's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed gentle. You do now. Mara shook her head. No, I can't let you do that. You already did more for me when I had nothing to give back. That was different. Yes, Nico said. It was. You helped a stranger. I am helping the woman who saved my life. He turned slightly. Call St. Agnes. Pay every balance under Toby Bellamy's name. Move him to the best cardiac team available. If they need anything, they get it. Tonight. One of his men stepped away at once. Mara covered her mouth with her hand. The opera house blurred again, but this time the feeling was not helplessness. It was too much relief coming too fast. It shook her harder than fear. Vivian made a small, desperate sound. Nico, please. Think about what you are doing. The sponsors, the casino contracts, the board. We have built too much to lose it over one mistake. Nico looked at her for a long time. Cruelty is not a mistake. It is a habit. Tonight you were simply unlucky enough to be recorded. By morning, the videos were everywhere. Adrian had wanted the city to laugh at Mara and Lila. Instead, the city watched Vivian Caro shove a young intern to the floor. They watched wealthy guests step around a crying girl. They watched a hostess in a silver gown mock a poor woman's body while raising money for charity. They watched Mara Bellamy, a wardrobe assistant no one had cared to know, stand between cruelty and someone smaller than herself. People shared the video with anger first, then with awe. Sponsors released careful statements before breakfast. Politicians who had smiled beside Vivienne the night before suddenly claimed they barely knew her. Celebrities deleted photos from the masquerade. Donors asked for their names to be removed from the event page. By noon, the Caro casinos were bleeding money. By evening, reporters had uncovered hidden loans, unpaid workers, quiet lawsuits and partnerships that began to vanish the moment Nico's protection disappeared. Roland Caro tried to call Nico 23 times. Nico did not answer once. Mara did not watch most of it. She spent that night and the days after at St. Agnes, sitting beside Toby's bed while machines breathed and beeped around him. Nico had sent doctors, specialists, paperwork and payments so quickly that the hospital staff suddenly spoke to Mara with a softness she had never heard from them before. No one asked her to step aside. No one asked how she planned to cover the rest. For the first time in years, Mara sat in a hospital chair without doing math in her head. When Toby woke after surgery, pale and weak, but alive, he turned his face toward her and smiled. "You look terrible," he whispered. Mara laughed and cried at the same time. "You scared me half to death." "Did you eat?" She cried harder then, because that was Toby. Even with tubes in his arms and stitches beneath the blankets, he was worried about her. Nico stood outside the room, giving them privacy. Mara could see him through the glass, speaking quietly to a doctor, the silver medal still resting against his chest. He looked like a man no one dared cross, but every time his eyes drifted toward Toby's room, Mara saw the wounded stranger from the rain. Weeks passed, then months. Toby recovered slowly, with the kind of strength that did not look dramatic from the outside, but meant everything to the people who loved him. He learned to walk the hospital halls again, then the stairs at home, then the little block near their apartment where the trees grew crooked through cracked pavement. He gained color in his face. He made jokes with the nurses. He told Mara he wanted to study architecture because hospitals were designed by people who clearly had never had to live in one. Lila left the opera house and began designing costumes under her own name. Not Moretti, not Caro, her own. Nico did not announce her. He did not buy her a career. He simply made sure no one could block the doors she had earned the right to open. Her first collection was small, soft, strange, and beautiful, filled with repaired lace, hand-sewn stars, and hidden pockets for little things people did not want to lose. As for Mara, she never returned to the Bella Vita Opera House as a worker. Nico offered her money. He offered an apartment. He offered to make every hard part of her life disappear with one phone call. Mara accepted help for Toby because pride had no place beside a hospital bed. But for herself, she asked for something different. A small shop, not in a rich part of the city, not behind velvet ropes or guarded doors, just a warm little clothing repair studio on a street where buses sighed at the corner and women carried groceries in tired hands. The sign above the door read, "Bellamy Alterations and Repair," painted in deep blue with a little silver saint near the corner. Mara made the front room bright and welcoming. There were strong chairs with wide seats, a soft couch, mirrors that did not make women feel punished for standing in front of them. She repaired wedding dresses, prom gowns, work pants, winter coats, and old sweaters people could not bear to throw away. She made clothes fit bodies instead of making bodies apologize to clothes. Women came in shy at first, arms crossed over their stomachs, saying things like, "Nothing looks good on me," or "I know I need to lose weight first." Mara would only smile, take out her measuring tape, and say, "You deserve clothes that fit you now." Nico came by often, though never with too many men. He had enough sense to know that a room full of nervous women did not need 6 armed shadows by the door. Sometimes he stood near the window while Mara worked, watching her pin fabric with careful fingers. Sometimes he brought coffee. Sometimes he brought Lila, who always arrived with sketches under one arm, and a story she claimed was not about Nico, but somehow always was. The city still feared him. That never changed. His name still moved through casinos, docks, clubs, and back rooms where powerful men spoke carefully. But Mara knew another version of him. She knew the man who kept an old saint medal close to his heart, the man who remembered the taste of soup from a laundromat thermos, the man who sat beside Toby during a late appointment because Mara had 3 fittings and refused to cancel on a bride whose mother had just died. One evening after closing, Mara found Nico standing in the shop doorway while rain tapped gently on the glass. The last customer had gone. The sewing machines were quiet. Toby was upstairs doing homework, and Lila had left behind a half-finished sketch on the counter. Nico looked at the little silver saint painted on the sign. "You kept it," he said. Mara followed his gaze. "I lost the real one." "No," Nico said, touching the medal beneath his shirt. "You gave it away." She looked at him then, really looked at him. "For years I thought that night ruined my life." His face darkened with regret. "It should not have cost you anything." "But it did," Mara said softly. "And still, if I found you there again, bleeding in the rain, I think I would do the same thing." Nico stepped closer. Why? Mara thought about the opera house, about Lila on the floor, about Toby opening his eyes after surgery, about women standing in her shop and seeing themselves without shame. She thought about Vivian Caro, who had owned rooms full of beautiful things and still had nothing inside her worth saving. She thought about kindness, how small it looked when given, and how far it could travel in the dark before returning. "Because I don't want the world to make me cruel," Mara said. Nico was silent for a moment. Then he took her hand and pressed it gently against the silver medal. It was warm from his skin. "You never were," he said. Outside, the rain softened the city lights until every window looked like it held a secret. Mara stood in her little shop, no longer hidden behind other people's gowns, no longer bowing her head for people who mistook wealth for worth. She was not thin, she was not rich, she was not born into power, but she had saved a life when no one was watching. She had defended a girl when everyone else chose laughter. She had carried love through years of hunger, debt, shame, and fear, and somehow her heart had not hardened. In the end, the world did remember the Bella Vita masquerade, but not for the gowns, or the diamonds, or the powerful guests who had filled the room. It remembered the night a cruel queen lost her throne because she mistook kindness for weakness. It remembered the girl with the broken locket, the Mafia boss who crossed a silent room, and the poor plus-size wardrobe woman who had once given away her last precious thing to save a stranger. And long after the scandal faded, after the Caro name became a warning whispered behind closed doors, Mara Bellamy's little shop stayed open, glowing softly on rainy nights. Women came in carrying torn hems, broken zippers, and quiet hurts. They left standing taller. Because true power was never in the money, the masks, the beauty, or the fear. True power was in what a person chose to do when no one important was looking. Mara had chosen mercy. Years later, mercy found its way back to her, wearing a black suit, carrying an old silver saint, and arriving at the exact moment the world thought she had no one left to call.